I believe before we resume public business, the chair of PPC would like the opportunity of dealing with future business.
Thank you, sir. I'd just like to update the Assembly that so far since late Monday afternoon, the Assembly has dealt with one standalone proposition and now 9 amendments to the government plan, some of which involves amendments to the amendments. If I have my calculations right, there remains 10 amendments to deal with. Also, the government plan itself, the draft finance law, and then 3 other pieces of legislation: the draft criminal justice deferred prosecution agreements law, draft non-profit organisations, amendment of law regulations, and the draft food law. There'll also be the Christmas greetings to deal with at the end of the meeting. I think with a fair wind this afternoon, the Assembly could get through quite a few items. But as we're going at the moment, if we carry on at the pace we went at this morning, we may have to decide that we have to stay very late tomorrow evening, which would not be ideal for anybody. So I don't think there's very much of an opportunity for us to sit on Monday, as I think quite a few members are leaving the island. So it was just really to say to members that if members could be quite concise with their speeches, that would be really helpful to all of us. And I think we'll have to take... I also would like to know how the Assembly feels if they'd like to start at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, which would give us an extra half an hour. And as I say, it would be very difficult to sit next week. So it was just really to say to everyone, while not trying to interfere with democracy, could everybody speak quite concisely? Thank you.
Well, I think it might be helpful if members could indicate that whether they wish to start at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Yes. Very well. Well, I'm going to assume that that is what will happen, and the Assembly will start at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. As the chair of PPC has said, we've already confirmed we're sitting until 8 o'clock this evening. If we are carrying on at the rate, I think we're not getting through many more than 2 or possibly 3 debates per half day, which on any analysis means that unless we speed up, and I'm not suggesting anything by that, but unless we speed up, we will not finish by the end of Friday, and it will be necessary to consider something alternatively, unless we simply carry on until we finish on a Friday. But there are significant pieces of legislation at the end of the list, which probably merit more than an exhausted jab at the button, if I can put it that way in a slightly flippant manner. Those are my observations, if I may. Connétable Simbrala.
Sir, thank you. I just wonder whether the movers of the proposition, should we say outside the government plan, would consider whether they could be deferred to the next sitting.
That's something that certainly can be considered, and it may be, I can't recall off the top of my head who's moving the food law and who's moving the deferred prosecutions, but it may be that can be deferred, it may be it can't. There may be reasons that perhaps if no one is capable of indicating to the Assembly now, then perhaps an indication could be given perhaps just before we break at 5:30 this evening, before we resume at 8, unless you're in a position to give it now, Deputy Renniff.
Sir, I would like to just make a consultation on that, but
of course.
In principle I would be subject to hearing from officers, otherwise I would be happy to defer.
I'm assuming the deferred prosecution agreement will be the Minister for Home Affairs. I can't recall.
Hello.
Deputy Howell.
Just wondering if the very important business could be moved to tomorrow morning, that you're saying we have to do. I just wondered.
I'm not sure what you mean by the very important business.
There was something that you said that we had to do at the end of the
At the end of the government plan,
yes.
The finance law there are financial provisions which need to be passed to give effect to the financial decisions made in the government plan, and that's
so we have
without
to wait.
which nothing, and that will need to be done. It's part of the government plan in effect.
Thank you.
It's just separate, but the other items are conceptually separate.
So I realise the Home Affairs Ministry is online, but both the deferred prosecutions and the MPO legislation are arising out of preparation for money vote.
I assume they were.
Therefore, it would be, if at all possible, notwithstanding the comments that the Chair of PPC has said, if they could be taken at this sitting. Thank you.
Yeah. Deputy Miles, did you wish to speak?
So not anymore. The Treasury Minister has taken the words out of my mouth.
Right. Thank you, Deputy Kovac.
Yeah, just wanted to say, because it's been agreed today to sit until 8 and was proposed initially to sit until 8 tomorrow. Has that been already agreed, or can we propose to sit
The
until
Assembly has agreed to sit until 8 this evening and agreed to sit until 8 tomorrow, but it was indicated when that agreement was reached and the Assembly so resolved that it may need to be revisited. And I think this is the Chair of PPC's desire to warn members that 8 simply might not cut it tomorrow evening. Very well. Do you wish to do any further indications, Chair?
Thank you, sir.
All right, we will resume then. The next item is the 8th. I think, Deputy Kovac, your amendment falls away as a result of the earlier decision. And so the next amendment is the 8th amendment, stamp duty on wills and immovable estate. It's lodged by Deputy Andrews. Now, in this case, Deputy, this is the one where you, at the beginning, didn't you, ask members to take a variation of it, an amendment of it early, and you would presumably wish to have it read as amended. The members agree that it can be read as amended? Very well. Well, then in which case, the main responder will be the Minister for Treasury and Resources, and I ask the greffier to read the amendment as amended.
Page 2, paragraph I. After the words Appendix 3 to the report, insert the words, except that on page 33 of Appendix 3, after the words relatively short period of time, there should be inserted a new section as follows. Stamp duty on immovable property. Stamp duty is made payable on immovable property upon the discharge of a will in line with item 46 of Schedule 1.3 of the Stamp Duty and Fees Jersey Law 1998, made payable on the net value of immovable property at the time of death of the testator. The current proportion stamp duty rates on immovable property range from £250 to £429,500 on market value bands ranging from £50,000 to £6 million. In appraising the current stamp duty rate against market values on immovable properties, it has been proposed that the stamp duty rates remain disproportionately low to immovable property market values. To ensure the broadening of revenue-raising streams, stamp duty on immovable property upon the discharge of a will shall be increased no later than 1st of January 2024 by raising the stamp duty by 50 pence on each £100 payable.
Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. Now, I think it's quite important that I begin by saying we do need to be enhancing our revenue streams. Now, when we are looking at stamp duty bands on item 46 under the law, they are very diminutive. Now, when we look at a £300,000 market price, £4,000 is made payable. Now, a 50 pence increase on each £100 will ensure that an additional £1,500 will be payable. Now, this will allow for increased flows from the private sector across to the public sector. And I think this is really important because often what we do see is it's those who are economically active. They are the ones who have to take responsibility. It's social security, it's personal income taxation, it is GST. And what we do need to be seeing is actually more broad measures. Because actually, people who do own their properties, they have an implicit rent. What that means is basically there are no debt obligations made payable in rental terms. However, the choice may be that they take on further debt obligations. And those debt obligations may need to be fulfilled. But having said that, sir, the overall estate could be in excess of millions. And it is only immovable stamp duty rates that are applied against estates that potentially could be 5 or 10 million. And we could be speaking of such diminutive rates as a percentage of the overall net wealth of the estate. And I think that really epitomises that actually, when we do see inheritance in Jersey, there is a great deal of inheritance where actually wealth accumulation is in perpetuity. And there is not really much in terms of redistribution. And if we do actually broaden some form of redistribution, it means we are going to be increasing revenue. And I think that is vital, because 49% of government revenue comes from personal income taxation. Now that is 23% above the OECD average. I think that is a considerable figure. And also it's a very problematic one too. So all I am saying here is we can be increasing revenue, and we just need to be looking at the previous years, from 2012 to 2021, and how low the revenue generated has been. Because it can be increased, and it's a marginal increase. And some may question, well, actually, how are some people able to pay the stamp duty that is to be made payable? Well, we could ask that question currently now, because there is only a marginal increase. That is all we are speaking of here. And you can see that across the bands. And also we need to be looking at financial and non-financial assets. And in particular, when we are looking at financial assets, you can actually be generating unearned income, and a lot of it too. So for lawyers who are dealing with estates, they are able to ensure that actually stamp duty is made payable. And yes, maybe if there are no other assets, then potentially it could be the case where properties could be disposed of, but that currently remains the case. It is not going to be any different. All we're speaking about is a rate being increased across bands. And that will be one argument I am sure some members will bring forward to the Assembly. And absolutely, yes, it is a good argument indeed. But I think what we do need to be seeing is a move away from taxing those who are labour and capital income earners. We also have to remember as well, our 0-10 tax regime, it has served us well. It has maintained our business supply. It has maintained our revenue streams as a government. But we do need to be looking domestically at other ways in how we can actually be procuring more revenue. I think that is absolutely vital. I think members need to take a look at the bands. For instance, if we are to be looking at a £6 million market value, and again, there are some properties that are worth 6 million. Currently, on the estate, it would be made payable 429,000. Instead, there'd be a £30,000 increase. Now, I'm sure if somebody has a property that is worth £6 million, you'd have actually a great deal of income savings. And a lawyer would be actually in a position where they'd be able to make payment of stamp duty. And we all know that. The greater the market value, the more inclined the positive net wealth position of the household. But as I say, there potentially could be external debt obligations that could be made payable, and this will vary on each individual case. Now, if we want to be generating more income, we can do that. And it will be a marginal increase, indeed, but as we have seen previously, stamp duty under Article 46 of the law is a very diminutive percentage compared to the aggregate stamp duty that is made payable in total. So, sir, thank you, and I will close my speech there.
Thank you very much. Is the amendment seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. Sorry. We're not having a good week this week, are we? I'm not. Sir, I would like to ask members to reject this proposition. Deputy Andrews is proposing an increase in stamp duty on a will of movable property on the basis that it will increase the stamp duty going into government revenue. And I have no confidence that that's the case. There is no legal requirement to register a will of immovable property. Any increase in stamp duty is likely to deter registration and, in fact, to reduce the duty that we receive. As Deputy Andrews says, lawyers and financial advisors are very clever and they're engaged to avoid and reduce tax as much as possible. And I would imagine there'll be very many lawyers saying to their clients, don't bother registering because you will have to pay increased stamp duty. Even when wills are registered, stamp duty exemptions mean that only 40% of wills attract stamp duty. For example, if the family home is left to the spouse or civil partner, if a property is left to charity, or if it's left to those who would inherit on an intestacy. So that was most likely to be children or siblings. So I'm not quite sure from that list who might inherit a property that would be paying stamp duty. It may very well be someone like a long-standing employee who inherits a £6 million property and has no hope of paying the stamp duty without then selling the property or borrowing. It may have unforeseen consequences. Registration evidences title and makes a future sale easier. But even if a will isn't registered and a will is lost, a conveyance can still happen. So even where there is no will, there's a way, I imagine. As I say, lawyers can find a way around most things. And I suspect it may be the case that people may choose not to register wills. If you don't have a will, if you lose it, the sale can go ahead on the basis of title indemnity insurance. It may be that title indemnity insurance is very much less than the stamp duty that we're now proposing, and that we see even less stamp duty. We also have to bear in mind that immovable property often passes to heirs automatically where there's an intestacy and no stamp duty is payable. So if somebody wants the will to go to their wife or husband or their children, they don't need a will, but having a will makes life very much easier for everybody. We don't want to encourage intestacy because that isn't helpful. Registration of wills can also help identify the current owner of a property who can be traced if they're outside Jersey. If no will is registered, it will be difficult to trace the beneficial owner. If the owner's left property vacant, we will not be able to address the vacancy or take action to bring the property into occupation. So this property may also increase the risk of homes being left vacant because the owner cannot be found. Due to limited scope and application, this proposition will not change our tax mix materially, and it may in fact have the converse effect to that which is intended and actually reduce government income from stamp duty. So for those reasons, sir, I would urge members to reject the proposition.
Connie Harbour, St Mary.
Thank you, sir, and I appreciate what the Deputy Minister just said. Whilst I obviously welcome the idea of an improved income stream, I am unable to support this proposition for a different reason. This is that it widens still further the gap between stamp duty payable on immovable estate and that any fee which is chargeable on movable estate on instead. The proposer includes in his proposition certain tables, and just to pick one example at random, the property of value at 931,000 will, under his scheme, attract stamp duty of 23,270. At the moment, if that value was not in a house, shall I say, but in personal assets, the equivalent probate fee payable then would be 6,000. That's about a quarter. And what I'm saying, sir, is that I think it is wrong to tamper with the stamp duty on immovable property unless at the same time we address the comparatively low rate of 0.75%.
Point of order, sir.
Beg your pardon?
Point of order, sir.
What is the point of order?
I think actually the Connaught Harbour is actually reading the previous amendment.
Oh, sorry.
Well,
with the
I'm not sure
rates.
there is a point of order, but it's probably useful if indeed you are going from the wrong script, so the wrong piece of paper.
I apologise for that, and thank you for bringing me to heel, as it were. That said, that was an illustrative guide. All I am saying, sir, is that on personal estate, the current rate of duty is the order of 0.75%, which is considerably less than that which is payable on immovable property. And I would resist any move to increase the stamp duty on immovable property unless we reassessed whether the current stamp duty on personal property was appropriate in the current climate. And my further sort of postscript to that, sir, is that personal estate will include property held through a share transfer. So to a certain extent, those who own their property through a share transfer system will attract, if that's the right word, only the rate at 0.75%, whereas if it was actually in bricks and mortar itself, it will be considerably more. And again, I suggest that that needs to be addressed more fully. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Connie. Does any other member wish to speak on this amendment? Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. I will keep this brief. I believe this proposition is in some way almost looking like an inheritance tax, but almost a self-inheritance tax. Now, personally, I don't have an issue with inheritance taxes as long as they are broader and more and considered more. Take the reference that the deputy made about a £6 million house. If someone was to inherit £6 million in cash at this time, they wouldn't pay any tax on it at all. But yet someone who inherits a valuable house would have to pay a form of tax. And I don't think that's directly fair. The Minister for Social Security points out that lawyers can find their way around certain taxes and things like this. And again, these lawyers will be working for the richer in our society, where the poorer, who may be fortunate enough to coincidentally inherit a property from someone who isn't a relative of theirs, may then not know about loopholes and may not be able to afford the lawyers. So they will end up being stung for this form of inheritance tax. And it's for reasons like this that I'm afraid that I cannot support the Deputy's amendment.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on this amendment? No other member wishes to speak on this amendment? I close the debate and call upon Deputy Andrews to respond.
Thank you, sir. Now, I think there's a few things that need to be cleared here. In terms of when Deputy Miller mentioned that it would be deterring people, I don't think that would be the case, because we are just looking at marginal increases here. And actually, are we seeing people be deterred? Because actually there have actually been increases currently with the quantitative data that has actually been stated on the amendment year upon year. And actually, market prices, and especially in relation to real estate, have been increasing. And therefore, when you're actually looking at the bands, also the stamp duty rates have also been increasing. And we also have to recognise that lawyers will be looking at their clients and their clients' positive net wealth position. So they will be registering a will, making sure that actually their clients are appropriately positioned when their will is to be registered. And I think that is also a point that has to be highlighted here, sir. By saying an additional £30,000 made payable on an estate that's worth £6 million, when there's already £429,000 made payable, up to £460,000, that will be a deterrent itself, is again a supposition. It's a normative statement. Where is the empirical evidence to suggest that this will be the case? And that was what I found in the comments paper in response to my amendment. And Deputy Joseph, he can keep on nodding his head, that's fine. He can be in disagreement with me. But the fact of the matter is, we do need to be seeing an enhanced level of redistribution. We have not seen enough. And actually, this is probably more inclined to be on the left-wing side of politics, where we'd be looking at measures to provide a form of redistribution from the private sector across to the public sector. Do we want to be broadening our revenue streams, or do we want to be relying upon the middleman and the middlewoman again and again to be contributing personal income taxation and social security And also we need to be looking here and analysing. Look at the rates that are applied with mandatory deductions on personal incomes compared to the rates that are lowly levelled on the net value of estates. Because actually when we are looking at the net value of estates, it's only a movable property that is actually going to be generating a form of income. The overall estate, though, is going to be exempt from taxation. And that's why I said financial assets and non-financial assets are not concomitant to taxation in Jersey compared to other jurisdictions, where that is precisely the case. And therefore the government is able to broaden revenue streams. You look at the UK, for instance, they have an inheritance tax. Now, it's also providing a broader revenue stream in terms of capital taxation. Now, Jersey doesn't have inheritance tax, it doesn't have capital gains tax, and therefore we are relying on fewer people to be generating income. When we are looking at capital taxation, we are looking also at the ability to have broader shoulders on those who can actually afford it more. And I have to say, sir, one of the reasons why I've come into politics is because I do feel very impassioned about helping the lower and middle deciles in our island. I think it's very important, sir, that actually they are not the ones who are going to be subject to increased mandatory deductions in future. And I'm afraid, as it currently stands, that will most likely be the case because we are not thinking and we are not being innovative enough. This is an opportunity where we can actually say, for each stamp duty transaction, there will be some additional income. And also we need to be looking at the aggregate amount that is going to be made payable. And how much will that be as a portion of overall stamp duty? Because at the moment, the stamp duty that we are collecting is all from property transactions, those who are purchasing property. And you look at how diminutive the figures are under item 46 of the law. And we could be speaking about estates in excess of 5, 10, 15 million. And all we see is a very disproportionate amount. And whoever the beneficiaries are will be in a position where it's going to be perpetual wealth. And that is also one of the things that continues to be the case in Jersey. Interestingly as well, when I was canvassing during the election, I bumped into a woman on the doorstep, and she said to me that she was very fortunate that she had inherited her parents' property and also all of the other valuables as well. And no longer did she have to work because she was in such a comfortable position. So all we are saying is we are going to provide a transfer, a fairly diminutive transfer, by the way, as it currently stands, and it will still be a diminutive transfer across from the private sector to the public sector. And it will also allow us to provide more revenue, to facilitate more expenditure, so we can actually help islanders. Because so far, sir, we have been facilitating expenditure, expenditure, expenditure. And where are the plans to generate additional income? They haven't really been forthcoming. I think this is probably one of the first amendments where we are actually seeing income be generated, sir. And there will be some members who, again, will be disapproving of this amendment. And that is fair enough. But importantly, I'm here, I'm a man of values, and I'm carrying out what I have set out to do. It's about standing on a platform, and for me, yes, I am a social democrat, and yes, I do believe that there has been too much emphasis placed on the people of Jersey to carry the burden. And this has been a problem that has become exacerbated, and that needs to change. by arguing in opposition to this, what we are saying is, let's allow everybody to continue to ensure that they are the ones who have to bear the responsibility, and actually, let's not touch those who can most afford it. Because a lot of these people, they can afford it. And this is giving us an opportunity to broaden our revenue streams, because we need to. And we have not been looking at different areas where we could be collecting more tax. Because as it currently stands, when we are looking at the current trends, the trends are showing that actually there will be an income increase. Deputy Miller, with her supposition, she may think that actually there's not going to be any income generated. Actually, there will be income generated. It's still going to continue. Because again, we're speaking 50 pence on each £100 made payable. That is all we are saying. For each £1,000, £5 will be payable. We also have to be looking at cash savings. We also need to be seeing at the level of disposable assets as well, and the net value of those disposable assets in order to actually pay stamp duty too. And I don't think that has been something that has been considered, unfortunately, in response to the argument that I have proposed before the Assembly. Now, sir, I am also very conscious of time, and we have so much more to get on with. So I will leave it there, and I will call for the appel, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. Members have had the opportunity of returning to their seats. Then I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been defeated. 8 votes pour, 39 votes contre, no abstentions.
Move the 8, please, sir.
Those members voting pour, Deputies Tadier, Rob Ward, Porre, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Kovac, Andrews, and the Qualitar.
Very well. The next item is the 13th Amendment, Enhanced Capital Allowance, lodged by Deputy Luce. The main respondent will be the Minister for Treasury and Resources, and I ask the greffier. Well, there's an amendment to this. Are you accepting the amendment?
No, sir.
Very well. I ask the greffier to read the main amendment.
Page 2, paragraph I. After the words Appendix 3 to the report, insert the words, except that on page 33 of Appendix 3, after the words relatively short period of time, a new section should be inserted as follows. Enhanced capital allowances. Currently, businesses are able under Part 12A of the Income Tax Jersey Law 1961 to claim capital allowances on qualifying capital expenditure to offset against allowable profits at a rate set at 25% per annum on a reducing balance basis. From the 1st of January 2024, a new capital allowance will be introduced for small and medium-sized businesses, allowing them to offset 100% of capital expenditure for investment in the fiscal year that it is incurred.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. And members will be pleased to know that the speech will not be bothering the timekeeper too much. I hope it will be the shortest speech of this government plan debate. But just because it's short doesn't mean it's not high on quality. And I'd just like to run members through it because it's quite simple to understand. I'm sure members will be conscious of capital allowances. And all I'm seeking here to do, sir, is to encourage and stimulate investment in the economy, not just reducing carbon footprint and the potential replacement of old and efficient plant, but across the whole economy, in enhancing these capital allowances which are available currently to small and medium-sized businesses. And members will know, I'm sure, currently that happens on a reducing basis of 25% per annum. And what I'd like to do, sir, here is to propose that those who make the investment get that benefit of 100% in the first year, year one. So here it is. There's no reduction in the tax received to the Treasury, although I'm sure the Treasury Minister is going to explain it slightly differently. This measure that I propose today merely is a different way of profiling that cash coming into the Treasury. Such an enhancement to the rules for capital allowances should incentivise businesses to invest in improving productivity and strengthening their asset base. So this is about short-term cash flow. Anybody who's run a small business knows, especially in the early days of that business, it's so vital to keep cash flowing through. And this is a way of helping those small businesses in those first 12 months. The island's economy is founded on small and medium-sized businesses. We still have hundreds and thousands of them here. I want to do what I can to help them invest in these difficult times and show that government wants to help them too. I'll leave it there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Is that seconded?
Yes, sir.
Very well. There's an amendment brought by the Council of Ministers, and I ask the referee to read the amendment to the amendment.
Delete the paragraph that begins from the 1st of January 2024 and insert the words, as part of the 2024 budget, which will be delivered in 2023 and focus on innovation and enterprise, ministers will consider a range of measures to encourage and stimulate investment, including the case for increasing the rate for capital allowances available to businesses that make qualifying capital purchases.
Yes, Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure I'm going to be quite as short as Deputy Lewis, but I'll give it a good shot. But ministers and I particularly, sir, support the principle that Deputy Lewis is trying to do, which is encourage business investment in innovation, possibly technology and other investment for the long term. I support that principle, which is why in this government plan I've said that the budget next year I'll be bringing forward measures to deliver innovation. That aligns with the work that the Minister for Economic Development is doing with his innovation strategy, and it aligns with the government's priorities. Where I can't be 100% certain, I shouldn't use that term, that I'm going to fully agree with Deputy Lewis is that he, before we do that consultation next year, so there's no difference on timescale, it will come into effect in the beginning of 2024 together. But I think we just need to make sure that we do an appropriate review. And that the reason I say that is that, of course, capital allowances are currently only available to tax-paying companies because the 0-10 regime significantly, therefore, limits the potential to benefit businesses that we might want to support through the innovation budget. So we don't have the tools available to us that other jurisdictions might do, who've got high rates of corporate tax, and for them, a full 100% capital allowance in year one makes absolute sense. You see the UK Chancellor gave a period of full capital allowances in the period to saying that they were going to increase corporation tax to try and encourage investment and limit liability to that tax. Because of the 0-10 regime, I think we're going to have to look at other measures to stimulate investment in business. And that might be looking at how we tax the shareholders, it might be looking at how we tax directors and think about using income tax as well as corporate tax. And that, quite straightforwardly, is why I brought this amendment to support the Deputy's principle, but not to say absolutely we should give all the money that we might have available to deliver innovation upfront to 100% capital allowance. We remind ourselves, of course, that the definition of SMEs elsewhere around the globe would mean that 92% of Jersey businesses are in scope. That might be absolutely appropriate. But again, we'll work through that as we do our review and come forward with the budget for 2023. So there's not much separating us, sir. It's just that I want to get absolutely the best bang for my buck when we come forward to investing and supporting businesses to invest in innovation. And I propose the amendment.
Is the amendment seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? No member wishes to speak. Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. This looks like a very close debate between myself and my neighbour on the benches over here. And Deputy Gorse has just said there's nothing much to choose between us. What happens at the moment and what I propose are very similar things. 25% reducing on an annual basis, or have the 100% up front in 1 year. Those businesses caught by this will continue to be caught by this. If they pay at the moment, they pay at the moment. If they're going to get some relief, they will continue to get that relief. There really is very, very little difference between us. So what I say to members is this. We've heard this morning from a number of people, coined by Deputy Joseph early on, actions, not words. And here we are. My proposal, my amendment is the action. The deputy next to me here proposes some words as a slight amendment. There's very little difference between the two of us, but I would urge members to look at my amendment and see that this is a way of helping those small, medium-sized businesses in that first year of making any investment which they might choose to do. Thank you, sir.
Right, Deputy, does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? Deputy Joseph.
So dare I rise as a former Assistant Minister for Innovation and also remind members but to congratulate Deputy Luce on bringing forward what I think is what was an immediately deliverable, but for the reasons that I endorse the Council of Ministers and the Treasury Minister's amendment. But I say so insofar as what the Treasury Minister said is that capital allowances could come in 2024. But what actually I would like to see as a member of the Council of Ministers is us go back to the Innovation Fund review, to the Terra Alice review, and get on with that. There were lots of actions set out in the Terra Alice review for innovation, which sadly the previous administration didn't get on with. There's lots of things we need to do. We need to accelerate as never before research and development, capital to deliver our zero carbon initiatives, to deliver productivity. We need action, not words, quickly, fast, quickly in 2023. And so these capital allowances are one bit of the armoury that is possible to deliver. And so in accepting, I hope, the amendment to the amendment, I hope that I can speak on behalf of the Council of Ministers to say that the Economic Development Minister isn't here, is that we're going to get on, the Economic Development Department is going to get on immediately with looking at ways that we can accelerate fast, quickly, putting all necessary arrangements in place that were based upon the Terra Alice review on innovation, which probably members don't even read, have forgotten about. It was done in 2015. It's excellent, got some really good stuff in it. I lost my job afterwards. It didn't seem to have much momentum after that. Let's put some momentum back into that. Let's listen to the matter that Deputy Luce has brought forward to the Assembly. Let's see whether or not we can do, if we need a mini budget to deal with mini budget requirements for accelerating capital allowances early next year. We've done one mini budget this year because we needed to. If we need to accelerate moving homes, businesses over to net zero, moving to increased productivity because of the recruitment crisis, let's get on with it. Let's absolutely get on with it. Let's accept the amendment to the amendment, but congratulate Deputy Lewis because he probably read the Terra Alice review, like others. I think he probably scrutinised it. There's loads of to-dos in that report that we need to get on with. Action, not words. Let's get on with it. Approve the amendment to the amendment and leave capital allowances. If we need to bring forward, let's bring them earlier. But it just can't be done in this budget, in this time frame. So thank you, sir. And that's just under 3 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Taddy.
Thank you, sir. Because I don't have any particular skin in the game, which is an expression that I picked up at Economic Development, which I quite like, It's not my amendment, it's not the party's amendment, but I think it's important to remain consistent, at least in asking the questions about what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And listening to Deputy Gorst speak, he didn't seem to make much of a case for why his amendment, the government amendment, is better than what Deputy Luce is proposing. And for all the, I know you're not allowed to repeat yourself in a speech, sir, but it sounds like ministers are happy to repeat themselves from speech to speech. They seem to have the same speeches written for every amendment, sir, which is actions, not words. And I'm reminded of the time, I think I've mentioned it maybe in the previous assembly, of that Monty Python sketch in The Life of Brian, where she comes in and says, they've arrested Brian. And they're talking about actions, they need to take more actions. And they say, right, this calls for an urgent discussion. And exactly what we have got here is actually a replacement where Deputy Luce is proposing action to be done now, go from 25% to 100% in the first year, and government's saying, well, let's just review it. So that's not actions rather than words, it's words instead of actions. And of course, the Treasury Minister can sum up. So what the questions I want to ask the Treasury Minister, which I think I find more concerning, and which certainly I discussed when we reviewed this a couple of weeks ago with our party, is I want to ask whether there's any potential downside to what Deputy Luce is proposing in terms of the unintended consequences. Is there a reason that now it's limited to 25% of investment that you can be claimed back per annum rather than the full 100%? So I think that kind of argument would be helpful to know why the status quo is as it is, rather than allowing a higher percentage or indeed the full amount to be claimed back. I don't want to stray into the main arguments, sir, the main proposition, but I think it's important to juxtapose the two arguments, is that a lot's been made in Deputy Luce's short report about the potential for investment in green energy, for example, and reducing carbon footprints. But of course, there's nothing in the investment that per se will have to be directed in that regard. So I'm asking the Treasury Minister, that seems to, if I've correctly understood, we might want a more nuanced tool rather than what Deputy Luce is proposing, to make sure that, and it doesn't have to be that, of course, because that's not the current case. It's simply you can claim back whatever investment, but it's in tranches, in 25% tranches. So you could invest in capital expenditure, which is not just carbon reducing, but actually could be the wrong kind of investment in terms of what the government's other goals are for reducing carbon emissions. So I'd be more interested to hear about that kind of argument in the summing up, rather than why the Treasury Minister is so close already to what the Deputy is proposing. Just a final observation is that I'm rereading a book by Douglas Rushkoff, who talks about the rise of the corporation. And it talks about the fact that over a period of time, corporations, companies, limited companies ended up having more rights than individuals. So you have the legal personality of a company, which actually is limited, so it doesn't have all the same responsibilities and liability of a person, but it's got many more tax advantages than an individual would. And I would ask that whatever the result of this is, that, for example, if an individual wants to make choices about capital investment in their own life, i.e. buying an electric car, switching the heating in their home from to green energy, which might involve some upfront investment, can they claim those expenses back as an individual when a company can do that? The answer is no. If one of us goes out and buys an electric vehicle and it costs £30,000 in a certain year and you've only earned £60,000 that year, you can't claim that back from the taxman as an individual. But a company, of course, can do that. So a company can decide how and when it wants to offset its taxes. And my concern, if indeed, and I want the answer from the Treasury Minister, again, are there any downward consequences, any unintended consequences for companies being able to potentially misuse this facility to invest and displace tax that would be owed simply by investing in capital investments which they may not need, which may not be beneficial for the wider community, but which would then deprive the tax office of income?
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? No other member wishes to speak. Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Gorse to respond.
Thank you, sir. I thought that Deputy Tadea started being opposed to my amendments, and he ended up making all of my arguments for me. He's quite right that it might be that during the course of the review, which would implement changes to capital allowances at exactly the same time, so the beginning of 2024, Deputy Luce and I are aligned that that's the right thing to do. But we might decide that we don't just want to give 100% capital allowance to every qualifying capital investment. We might want to align the capital allowance allowance with the work that so I'm looking over there, but really I should be talking to the Energy and Climate Change Minister, wants to do to encourage green investment or businesses to transform their premises and invest in making them more energy efficient. And we could say, well, they can have a 100% capital allowance, but we're going to leave other qualifying investments to be 25%. Of course, roughly the 25% is really connected with the time of an asset replicating depreciation in a way, but it's that sort of thing. That's why you do it like that. The downside, of course, of which I think is also a point that Deputy Tadea was trying to make. So I don't ever recall that I'm making a speech reinforcing the points in a speech that Deputy Tadea has made, but there might just be one. But we won't touch on that, sir, because we don't want to touch on that issue today. And that is that you are giving a benefit to a business that was already making the investment. So it's really not encouraging innovation and investment. That would have been investment that was made anyway. And so it's for those reasons that I think we're going to want to carefully think about whether 100% for every investment. And we remind ourselves that it's only tax-paying businesses, and I think we might want to do the capital allowances also with some form of grant, which again is work that the Energy and keep forgetting. The Energy Minister is going to be bringing forward during the course of the year as well, and it would be really great to have a joined-up aligned policy where we were actually taking action and not just talking about taking action. And it's for that reason, being very aligned with the deputy here to my left, just wanting to have that bit of flexibility so that, and I'm fully prepared to work with him. He can come in and work in Treasury, make sure that we get it absolutely right, so we're delivering the best possible benefit. I was going to say, so there could be a business that's got a gas coffee roaster, and they want to change it to an electric one. Surely 100% capital allowance in year one would be good for them, but not if they were just replacing it with another gas one. I therefore, sir, make the amendment, and for those reasons I ask members to support it. Thank you.
Is the appel call for
Sorry,
the appel?
sir.
Yes, please, sir.
Sorry, sir.
Yes.
Can I just make a point, please?
I'm not sure, Chair, but I mean, in what capacity?
It might be misleading the Assembly. It's just that as Chair of PPC, I think I should bring it to everyone's attention that we have an Assistant Minister for the Environment. We do not have an Energy Minister. And Deputy Gorse keeps referring to Deputy Jung, and we've been through this with the Chief Minister, and it's not in standing orders. We would have to change standing orders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair of PPC. The reality of it is that that one should do one's best to refer to people by their ministerial or assistant ministerial title. I'm afraid I don't always do it because sometimes it slips my mind, but it is appropriate to do so, and that is the way it should be dealt with, either to refer to them as Deputy X or as by their correct ministerial or assistant ministerial title. Both of those are in accordance with standing orders. The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats and ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on the Council Minister's amendment to Deputy Luce's amendment, the 13th Amendment, and ask members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been adopted, 42 votes pour, 6 votes contre, no abstentions.
Those members voting contre the Connaught Harbour, St Lawrence, St Martin and Grouville, Deputies Luce, Lehegara and Farnham.
We now return to the 13th Amendment as amended. Does anyone wish to speak on the 13th Amendment as amended? Nobody wishes to speak. All those in favour of adopting the 13th Amendment as amended, the appel is called for. Invite members to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. Did I close the voting? If I haven't, then I close the voting. Yes.
Got plenty more of those.
The amendment as amended has been adopted, 47 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. The next item is the 14th Amendment, Residential Land Withholding Tax, lodged by Deputy Luce. The main responder will be the Minister for Treasury and Resources, and I ask the greffier to read that amendment.
H2, paragraph I. After the words Appendix 3 to the report, insert the words, except that on page 33 of Appendix 3, after the words relatively short period of time, a new section should be inserted as follows. Residential Land Withholding Tax. Residential Land Withholding Tax, RLWT, is a tax paid by offshore property owners, those who own property in Jersey but are not resident, who sell their residential property. From the 1st of January 2024, RLWT will be introduced at a rate of 30% of the gross sale proceeds of offshore property holders, with the rate increasing to 50% from the 1st of January 2025. This will encourage non-resident investors to divest of their Jersey property and leave the Jersey property market prior to this date. By selling their property by the end of 2023, they will avoid having to pay RLWT in the future when selling their Jersey investments. The aim of RLWT will be to act as a deterrent for non-resident investors to continue to beneficially own Jersey residential properties.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. And in this amendment, I think I'm proposing something that members in the Assembly may not have come across before, and that is the introduction of a new tax that hopefully produces no revenue for the Treasury. I hope, sir, that by the time it would, if approved, come into force, there would be nothing left for it to tax. This amendment seeks to introduce a new property tax in Jersey entitled, as we've already heard, Residential Land Withholding Tax, and it would be paid by non-resident owners of Jersey share transfer property when those properties are sold. This amendment is proposed solely for the purpose of releasing those type of property onto the market for the benefit of islanders and for those looking for homes to live in. So can I start right at the outset by saying that there would be some exemptions to this proposed tax. There will be some people who are not living here, not resident, but who this proposed tax would not apply to. I think it goes, of course, without saying that anyone with Jersey residential qualifications, wherever they might be living, would be exempt. The other most used exemption would be mainly, but not exclusively, around the subject of inheritance. This proposed tax would not be applicable to a sale or disposal of an inherited property or relationship property settlement, the property transfer from a deceased person to the executor or administrator of the estate, the property transfer by an estate on the death of a person, where the seller is a beneficiary of an estate or selling or disposing of an inherited property, or where the seller holds a valid exemption certificate. Let's be clear, those living away from the island, non-residents who inherit Jersey property and subsequently wish to sell it, would not be subject to this tax. So I hope that deals with that issue, sir. It's a subject that many islanders have contacted me about since I lodged this amendment. On completion of the sale of the share transfer property owned by a non-resident, land withholding tax would be paid to the Treasury on behalf of the non-resident owner, who then receives the balance of the sale proceeds. I'm proposing in this amendment that it would come into force on the 1st of January 2024 at the rate of 30% of the gross sale proceeds, but after that, on the 1st of January 25, that percentage would increase to 50%. But let's be clear, these percentages could well change, as could the dates. Payment of this tax can be avoided altogether, and this is really the crucial bit of this amendment, can be avoided altogether if property is sold before the 31st of December 2023, and that's the lead-in time that I'm intending to use to encourage non-resident investors to divest themselves of their Jersey property sooner rather than later. This tax will therefore effectively act as a deterrent for non-residents to continue to own share transfer residential properties here in Jersey. Sir, there's clearly an undoubted shortage of residential property for islands to purchase at the moment, and this is in part caused by some non-resident investors owning residential share transfer properties. It's my hope that we can address this and create, even if it's just a few more homes for Jersey people. So it says in my report that the number of properties in non-residential ownership remains unknown at the time of lodging, and in here I wish to make an apology to members. In the 2019 tax returns, 740 non-residents were declaring residential property income. Therefore, it's safe to assume that there is around that number units of accommodation that could fall under this proposed tax, and that's currently based on those latest figures. And the numbers come from an answer given to Deputy Mezek in a question in the States earlier this year. They come from Treasury, and it's just an indication of the number of properties that could be brought into scope. As I've repeatedly said in the past in this Assembly, it's my view that increasing supply reduces demand, and that in turn that would help to stabilise or maybe even reduce slightly housing prices here in the island. So this, in my view, is a win-win for locals trying to purchase a home. Incentivising non-resident owners to leave Jersey's housing market by the introduction of this tax will result, in my view, in a much-needed boost to the supply of share transfer properties. There's those owned by non-residents become available, the choice for local increases, and this can only go in some way towards meeting the demand by local first-time buyers. Sir, I have to accept and say to members that I realise that the detail in my amendment is far from perfect, and I apologise for that. But I hope very much that members accept the principle of what I'm trying to achieve. I want to say to members that last Friday I eventually managed to get a meeting with the Housing Minister, and I'm grateful for him and his time and his officer's time to discuss this amendment. So I want to say to members that one particular point raised during discussion at that meeting has caused me to think very long and hard in the 6 days since then. And the matter in hand is the availability of rental properties on the island at the moment. If a non-resident decided, because of this tax was looming, to sell their property here in Jersey, there is a chance that they could decide to refurbish and redecorate that property to gain maximum sale price. That could move, and I say could, that move could mean that tenants found themselves looking for alternative accommodation. That could, and I say could, again, lead to increased demand for rented accommodation. and potentially leave some tenants struggling to find somewhere to live. Sir, the absolute last thing I would wish to do by bringing this amendment would be to put as a consequence even one person struggling to find a home to live in. Consequently, I'm going to withdraw this amendment today at this time. I serve notice that I will closely monitor the situation, and especially the situation which has caused me to withdraw, and should circumstances become more favourable in the future, I will not hesitate to bring this issue back to the Assembly. Thank you, sir.
The 14th Amendment is accordingly withdrawn. The next amendment is the 19th Amendment, suspension of high-value residence, lodged by Deputy Mezek, and I ask the main responder will be the Chief Minister, of course, and I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph I. After the words Appendix 3 to the report, insert the words, except that, on page 34, after the words Scheme for New Entrants, there should be inserted the following words, and will therefore suspend the high-value residence scheme in 2023 to enable the government to complete this review before any new entrants are accepted.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't expecting that so quickly. So the effect of this amendment is very simple. It is simply to say to the government that for the duration of 2023 that they will not accept applications under section 21E of the Control of Housing and Work law, those applications which are more commonly known either as their old title 11K or as high value residents. This being because there is currently a review taking place into the scheme. And I would say that the fact that there is a review taking place into that scheme is itself evidence that the current scheme is operating in a way which is at least suboptimal. And if it's agreed that the scheme is suboptimal, why would we continue to accept applications under it when we are accepting, by virtue of that review taking place, that the island is being shortchanged by that scheme and its current rules? What this would then enable us to do as an Assembly is to consider the outcome of that review, to then determine what we want to do with it, whether we want to reform how the scheme works, how its rules operate, or whether we want something entirely different entirely. The Council of Ministers have lodged comments opposing this, and there are two sentences in it that I wish to take issue with before moving on to some other points. The first, sir, is it's common and good practice for policies to be reviewed, but that does not mean that applicants acting in good faith should have their plans interrupted. Well, I object to that as an approach because I believe that this policy, if it's to exist, ought to primarily be about the benefit to Jersey and not to the benefit of the applicants if their applications are suboptimal. I think Jersey should come first here, not those who are applying. And if they are so keen to come to Jersey and are so desperate to be here for all that we have to offer, I'm sure they won't mind waiting a little bit for their application to go through a new and improved system if that's where we get to. But it's the sentence that follows that in these comments that does bug me. It says, we're also intending to review our policies around housing qualifications based on hardship, but we're not going to call a halt on any hardship applications while we do so. Well, in my experience, having served on the Housing and Work Advisory Group, if you were to call a halt on hardship applications, it would have no effect at all because they're virtually never accepted anyway. Under the current rules, their application is extremely strict, and I am aware of very, very few examples of people successfully being able to get their housing qualifications granted to them on the basis of hardship. So those are, I think, two schemes which can't be compared in this way. Whereas my recollection on the Housing and Work Advisory Group is that we really did appear to accept every application that came to us with very little questioning. Very little questioning from the members of the Housing and Work Advisory Group, with the exception of myself, where the minutes from that group's meetings over the 2 years I served on it will show that I opposed every single 21E application that came to us. And in my report to this amendment, I've attempted to elaborate on some of the experiences I had with that scheme. And I note that there isn't really, in the government's comments, any clear response to the things I say in them. So, Sarah, I'm going to deliver some home truths here that some might find challenge their preconceptions about this scheme. So, as I said, I served on the Housing and Work Advisory Group for 2 years, and I saw the paperwork for dozens and dozens of applicants under this scheme. And I suppose the majority of them were unnotable. There were some, sir, that I regarded as disgraceful for having reached the Housing and Work Advisory Group, and even further disgraceful the fact that they were accepted by a majority of the membership of that. So I saw applications which came to us which did not include complete police checks, yet they reached us with a recommendation from officers to approve anyway. I think that's wrong. I opposed those applications. The majority of the membership of the group did not oppose them, and we accepted them anyway. I saw applications from people who, when you read about the source of their wealth, their income, something didn't quite seem right about it. It didn't quite seem like they were the kinds of entrepreneurs they were boasting of. And when you Googled them, you discovered that actually the source of their income was not actually as independent as you'd think, but actually came largely from their spouse. And when you Googled their spouse, found out that there was cause to be concerned with them. And very clearly, the application for 2NE status went through the name where less would come up on that Google search about their reputation and what they might be investigated for in other jurisdictions. Clearly a way of getting around it. And so I encountered several applications. I started noticing it, that there was a business name that came up multiple times. And it was a business that employed high-earning people in their branches outside of Jersey who wanted to bring those employees to Jersey and chose the 2NE route rather than just getting a license to employ them. The route that essentially gave these high-earning people, not entrepreneurs, employees who just happen to earn a very, very large amount, the benefit of being able to skip all of our housing queues, coming here to work for an already established business, no intention to form their own businesses or employ people or involve themselves in charity, but who'll get a nice tax exemption for the privilege. This happened several times, and I was told that this was a business that had located in Jersey with a wink and a nudge to be told that the government would help facilitate their location here. A complete misuse of this scheme, in my view. So there are grave concerns over this scheme, some of which is on a moral basis of being uncomfortable with allowing people to skip the queue and get tax exemptions to do that. And there are also contentions, which it appears the government agrees with, about whether the scheme in its current terms provides the best value for money and the best opportunities to allow Jersey to feel the benefit of high-earning people when they come here. So I ask the Assembly to agree that whilst that review goes on, we have some breathing space. We don't allow a scheme to continue in the short term where there are serious question marks over how it is managed, what kinds of applications come through, and which the government itself acknowledges is operating on a suboptimal basis. And we provide some breathing space so that when that review has been concluded, ministers can come to the Assembly, say, this is what we found, these are the changes we'd like to undertake. How does that sound to you? Do you agree or not? And we can express a view at that point. But in the meantime, let's not continue to sell Jersey short, and let's not continue to open up for applications where there as yet has not been evidence provided that the scheme and its application of that scheme has been improved from some of the grave concerns that I raised whilst I was a member of it and getting nowhere on that and constantly being denied answers to questions I was asking for because of a majority on that committee that didn't care. and which in the government's own comments to this amendment, where I have in my report explained some of these concerns, have had no attempt to have those answered either. So I hope that members will seek to play it safe and press the pause button on this scheme until we can be sure that it's giving Jersey its best outcomes. So I make the amendment, sir.
Is the amendment seconded? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, I would like to ask Deputy Mezek to not look at this government and the current HAWAG through the lens of the last one that he endured. I have great sympathy with some of the descriptions that he gave, and I can understand where he's coming from. But, sir, I can assure him and members that the current HAWAG takes this role very seriously. And as members see, we have already brought one amendment to the current rules, version 4, changing the minimum tax payable to any new entrants going forward. And we are also immediately addressing some of the criteria that we're able to, such as the minimum value of a residence that incoming people would be allowed to purchase, and increasing that from the current value of 2.5 million to 3.5 million. I hope, sir, that that gives the Deputy an indication of where we're coming from and also where we're going to. And in terms of the consideration that we give and the depth and this care with which we take this responsibility, I can assure both the Deputy and the Assembly that the current members of HAWAG are rather more assiduous in our considerations. And in fact, this has led to some disgruntlement from some quarters, yes, because we have applied and asked a considerable number of questions. We have been known to turn down number of applicants. Some of those applicants have actually come back to us and asked to be considered under the inward investment rules, and we have been able to find a very good accommodation and a way forward, and look forward to welcoming those residents and the businesses that they wish to bring to the island, and the revenue that they will therefore generate for the island and islanders, and particularly in terms of the employment opportunities that they are aiming to bring to the island also. So, sir, this is very much a new era, and we have already made a clear commitment to bring forward new rules, a version 5 of this this category in the early part of next year, and we will do that, sir. We want to give the message that yes, Jersey is a stable jurisdiction, but also, sir, we are open for business, and also we are very proud of what we have to offer. There are a number of people who wish to move to the island to live for a variety of different reasons, because we have a wonderful island to offer. And we do, as a community, welcome all people who come here for a variety of reasons, whether that's to bring their skills and contribute to our healthcare and our education services, or whether that is to contribute in terms of generating employment, jobs, and revenue, because that's one of the things that makes us such a cosmopolitan and interesting small island jurisdiction and economy. So, if this amendment was accepted, it would only have impact for a short period of time for the reasons I've set out. But it would have an impact on those people whose applications have already been made. And I do think that it would be unfair to put that block on those applications, because people do start to think about where they might live, where their children might be educated, and it is very clear that those applications are under consideration, and they are not, it certainly has to be said nowadays, a foregone conclusion. I would also just like to end, sir, by saying that I do find this amendment slightly strange and somewhat at odds with the Reform Jersey Manifesto, and indeed as recently as September this year, their amendment to our mini-budget, which suggested a 25% income tax rate for local residents was acceptable to them. But they, in both of those publications, pointed out that they did not wish or intend to make any change to the current 2.1e schemes whatsoever. And so it might be helpful in a summing up if the Deputy could explain to the Assembly why they have suddenly taken such a change of view. Thank you, sir.
So may I to clarification of the Chief Minister's speech, not to do with that point, something else.
Well, I mean, are you prepared to give way for a point of clarification, Chief Minister? It's a matter for you.
Yes, sir.
All it was, you mentioned a number of applications that might be suspended. Can we know how many applications are currently in the pipeline? Thank you, sir.
My recollection, sir, is it's approximately 7 currently.
Very well. Deputy Hart.
Thank you, sir. This is a topic on which I've discussed quite a lot with the Chief Minister, and I would like to say that I think we do now have a new government and we have a new HAWAG. I think perhaps with the last government things were out of kilter, but I now feel that I have confidence that this government is going to address these issues. When we arrived, sir, there were 5 what was called 11Ks admitted every year, but last year I think there was, and the last several years, considerably more. But I have faith that the new government will address this. And I'd just like to say that we have some very good friends who have come in under this scheme, and they're doing a great deal for the island. They quietly contribute a great deal in their charity work and in many areas. And I would just like to say that I don't think the scheme should be completely suspended. I think we should wait for the review and we should endorse what the government is doing. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Conor Tarbison Brillard.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to follow the last speaker in that I'm well aware of the philanthropy engaged in by several of the people involved. I empathise with the Deputy Mezek's proposition, sir. And I think it's time that a warning shot was fired in that we have seen some, I dare to call it, questionable applications approved, and question the economic benefit. We've seen commercial premises snapped up by individuals in this bracket, with the result that the prices of these particular properties are driven up out of the reach of the local market, which is unreasonable and unfair. Likewise, we've seen large properties purchased, which is good for the large properties in the longer term, but of course it does tend to drive up building costs because these applicants are quite happy to, should we say, spend rather more than the local market may be able to stand. The final point I'd like to make, sir, in the councillors or HAWAG's latest iterations of their, should we say, qualifications would be that the suggestion that house prices be raised to 3.5 million seems to me remarkably low in this very buoyant property market. And I would request, sir, that they revisit that figure because it seems to be out of proportion with what the market is showing at the moment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Conor Tarb, Deputy Tadier.
Thanks, sir. So I ask a question, and I don't think I'm just asking it of my social democratic friends in the Assembly, but hopefully to every member, is when we make policy or when we continue policy in the Assembly and for government, does fairness matter? Is fairness a consideration? And the way I look at the current 2.1e scheme, and of course, there'll be people who can speak in favour of it, people who can speak against it. and cite, as the Constable cited, some downsides, potential downsides, and Deputy Howler's cited some of what she thinks are the advantages of both the scheme and the individuals who come in under the scheme. Let's look at some undisputable facts. I've been dealing with a constituent who was born in Jersey. She had to leave Jersey just before she was 5 years old because there was quite a difficult breakup in the family. Her mother now lives back in Jersey, remarried. She's elderly. She wants to move back to Jersey so that she can look after her mother and buy her own apartment nearby, but living on her own, but be on call for her elderly mother and elderly stepfather, so that she can do what she thinks is the correct familial responsibility, looking after the mother who looked after her when she was young. Under the current rules that we have in place in Jersey, she's not allowed to live in the island that she was born in. Certainly she's not allowed to live here in her own property, even though she's got enough money to buy a property to live here and to do what I think most of us would instinctively feel is the correct and right thing to do. On the other hand, a Russian oligarch can come to Jersey and keep lots of money here. And we don't need to name any Russian oligarchs, so even though I could and I am allowed to do that, it's in the public domain. We can roll the red carpets out for people who don't live here to come over and say, the rules don't apply to you. There's usually a 10-year waiting list for people. Indeed, this woman, if she wanted to come back, and it's been through the usual channel, sir, is something which I'm continuing to work on, and I may have to bring a separate proposition to the States to deal with people in her situation. We'll deal with that when we need to. But the rules don't allow that person to live in Jersey. If she wanted to come back under the current rules, she'd have to live in a rented property or somewhere for 5 years, or she could then get her qualies to be with her mother, who I hope will still be around for many years to come. But it's not guaranteed. She's probably about the same age as my late mother. So let's see how she gets on. So does fairness matter? For me, certainly it does matter. And when we hear platitudes that are rolled out saying that, well, we can justify the current scheme that we've got on the basis that it may not be fair, but the outcomes which it produces for the wider community are on balance acceptable, because it allows us to do other things and it allows us to generate money to provide better outcomes. So on balance, that's fair. But that's never been proven. Nobody's ever come back with a true, not an independent, I don't even think a partial, they've never come back with any cost-benefit analysis of how that scheme works. And until that scheme has been proven, then I think those who are espousing the value of the scheme should say, let's pause it until we've tested it. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to deport anyone, but those who are here under the current rules of the scheme will stay here. They're not going to be asked to leave the island. They'll be able to continue to do the good work that they do, if indeed they do that, and I'm sure they do in the case of Deputy Howe's friends. But that won't necessarily be the case, and I want to see the workings for that. Now, there are reasons to be ideologically opposed, I think, to the inherent unfairness that the scheme proposes, because, of course, there are two inherent unfairnesses. One is that you get to jump the housing queue, which other people don't, even Jersey-born people. And the second is that you get a highly beneficial tax rate. So this isn't just about rich and poor, or rich and not so rich. A Jersey-born multimillionaire who has already got their residential qualifications has to pay how much tax? How much tax does somebody pay? A multimillionaire who's earning millions of pounds a year in Jersey, they pay 20% tax on all of their income, don't they? Well, they do, that's right. They pay 20%. So if you're a Jersey-born multimillionaire who's getting £10 million a year, you will pay £2 million in tax a year. But if you're not a Jersey-born multimillionaire and you've been invited to the island under this scheme, you pay a vastly reduced amount of tax compared to the Jersey-born multimillionaire, or even maybe the not Jersey-born, but the person who's got their qualities and made their money whilst they were here, no doubt through their hard work. Is that fair? I'm just asking that question. Is it fair? Doesn't it put the person who's been brought in under this scheme in an unfair competitive advantage vis-à-vis the other individual who's made their money, might have exactly the same income paying more tax? I think the answer is indisputably yes. So if those who are open-minded to the scheme and think it should continue, then I want to see the workings in order to justify those inherent and undisputable unfairnesses in the scheme before we continue to endorse it. The last 2 points I do need to respond to is that, of course, the 25% income tax rate that we were proposing didn't include 21Es because it's a completely separate system, and that needs to be dealt with through a separate proposition. And this is effectively that proposition. It's saying, let's look at that scheme, because the marginal rate doesn't apply to them anyway. The 20% rate doesn't apply to them and all their earnings. That's that point dealt with, sir. And I think with that, I'll be interested to see what the government response is. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy Constable St Mary.
Thank you, sir. In a former life, I was partnering in a legal practice which, as part of its trade, if you like, did act for many wealthy immigrants, 711 codes. I think at that time, they came without any hesitation or fear of being heckled or whatever it might be by the local population. And the reason for that was that the number coming at that stage was relatively limited, 10, 12 a year. They were buying properties of a certain value, which not within the scope of an ordinary person, if there's such a thing, pocket. And further, they were paying 20% on their full income. They became a full Jersey resident on being imported. And that is the difference we have now between that and the present situation. I don't necessarily disagree. Certainly there was at that time a wealth test as to how you or why you should come in. That was done in a much more informal way than it is now. But if you passed that test, you were and could satisfy the government of the day, mainly the late Enoch Powell, if I'm allowed to say that, sir, then you were allowed in with everyone's blessing. That didn't cause a problem. Where we are now, sir, is that there are, first, a larger number of incomers than there were previously, which skews the market. And secondly, above all, I think that when they do arrive and get their permission, their benefit is or one of their benefits is that they only pay 1% tax on the income over a certain figure. And it is that aspect which I think is the most divisive of all. If they pay the full 20%, I don't think people will mind. And I do question whether that 1% is a practical disadvantage. I recall that during the course of the last Assembly, I lodged a question of the Treasury Minister, who replied to the effect that the average tax received by such persons over a 3 or 4 year period was the order, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 per applicant. And if an applicant is coming in and is able to justify that he's going to pay tax on a certain figure, which means income of not far short of £1 million, I think most households can reasonably live on that. And those people take the view that if they need anything further, they will not bring it into England, into Jersey, sorry, sir. If they need more funds, they will perhaps cash in on certain of their portfolio. No capital gain tax, so they won't be disadvantaged. And I do ask the government, when re-looking at the current plans, as to whether they wish to keep that 1% rate, because it is a divisive part of the overall policy at present, and I think a lot of problems will be solved if they reverted to the full 20%, although I fully accept that does not meet Deputy Taddier's point that there's still going to be, well, it does actually, I think that local residents who have a greater income than that can so arrange their fares that they reduce their income below a certain figure. So I don't think that would be a discriminatory aspect. So I do ask the government to look at that aspect in particular. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Connie Tibbs. Any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Stevenson.
Thank you, sir. During the past few months, I've been engaging with Jersey's sporting clubs, associations and organisations, and I've seen many different themes emerge from those conversations. One reoccurring theme has been the extensive contribution that Jersey's high-value residents make to our sporting community. Many make large financial contributions on a regular basis, but their support also extends beyond simply money to contacts, ideas, practical help, and also volunteering. So to quote one conversation with a local sporting group, they urged me that if I could do one thing in this term of office to support sport, it would be to please do not stop high-value residents being able to come to Jersey. And I place that on record now on their behalf and on behalf of other sports organisations and individuals who benefit from the support of high-value residents who commit time and money to sport in Jersey. Deputy Mezek questions in his report the evidence of the contribution made to our community by high-value residents, and I'd respectfully suggest that this is one example. I know that the head of high-value residency is always very happy to meet States members who want to learn more about the scheme, and I'm confident in saying that if Deputy Mezek or others would like to hear directly from sporting groups who benefit in this way, then I'm sure this can also be arranged. I personally remain open to further discussion around the high-value resident regime in due course, but I do support ministers at this stage in their view that halting the scheme now and in this way is not the right approach and could be disruptive to a scheme which does have benefits for our community. Thank you.
Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I sound a bit like a broken record, sir, sometimes, and I apologise for that. I think that was mainly reform, sir. I do sound like a broken record because I stood in this assembly in 2012, which brought in the high-value residency scheme on a statutory basis. Before that, it was known as CAYS. For the first time, it was brought in with a tax contribution which would go up by inflation, the minimum of then in 2012 of £625,000. It's had a number of iterations since then. It has been increased now, and the government is bringing forward a further increase to that minimum contribution up in line with the existing arrangements up to £850,000. The original plan was brought in, and some members have spoken about the 1%. What was happening is that Ks were coming here, but they were dropping off all their assets in Guernsey, in other offshore centres, so that they just basically paid their minimum tax contribution. We changed it in order to basically ensure that they brought their business to Jersey. There was also supposed to be a social and economic statement done by, I never sat actually on HAWAG. Goodness knows what happened in the last government. But I know that when I brought forward and gave undertakings to the Assembly of what would happen, it is an income tax law, which is why the Treasury Minister is, and under the Chief Minister is, it's a decision of the Chief Minister, but it's an income tax law, it's a tax law, but of course, every application has to go through a set of criteria and an application seen as to whether it fulfills that criteria. Some of the only thing that's a statutory basis is the tax contribution. The other things are guidance and they're policy issues. Policies are changing, and that's what the government is doing. They're changing the policies under the Chief Minister's leadership. She's made it very clear of the social and economic value that she wants. We don't want detrimental individuals that are just coming here and not doing anything and contributing to Jersey. Those are discretionary issues which the then HAWAG group made. I must say, I know that there has been a great deal of disquiet made by members of our community. I heard it at the election. About the activities of some 21Es. I think there's a lot of unfair speculation about some of them. I think one of the things I know, and of course one can't talk about it because they're private matters, but I know numerous 21Es that they live by and I interviewed some 2-1Es when I was making some of the decisions as Assistant Chief Minister. I see the Treasury Minister nodding. I made it very clear to them that it wasn't just the tax we're interested in. We're interested in all the other benefits that they were going to bring to Jersey, all of the other benefits that the Assistant Minister for Sport, Deputy Stevenson, has spoken about so eloquently. There were other members of this Assembly that know the huge amounts of assistance that some of our valued 2-1Es give to Jersey. That's quite apart from what they put into the local economy. As the Financial Services Joint Minister with Deputy Gorst, I'm very concerned that putting a hold on the scheme is going to stop some applicants. I'm not a decision maker on the actual group, but I am aware from consultations with Deputy Gorst of a number of applicants that are going to be bringing some really exciting funds to Jersey. These are green funds. These are all sorts of innovative funds that are going to create real value to Jersey. And I'm not just talking about a few jobs here and there. I'm talking about hundreds of millions of pounds of funds that are going to come. If we go with Deputy Mezek, and I'm not sure whether or not he saw some of these really good applications when he was sitting on Haywag or whatever he was doing there as a housing minister. But all I know is that the applicants that are currently, as I understand, I don't know any of the names of them, but I've heard about some of the nexus and the funds that they're going to be bringing are absolutely really, really significant. They're really important to the future of Jersey. They're really important in advancing green finance initiatives, innovative funds where we're winning business from the United States. We're winning business as a funds jurisdiction of choice from other jurisdictions. There's a flight to quality. There's a flight to stable finances, to security. This is what we stand for in this Assembly. That's what we want. We don't want... there is a pejorative name for some 2-1Es that just don't do anything. We want active 2-1Es that benefit our community, that benefit our not-for-profit organisations, that benefit the international community, that benefit Jersey as a whole, both the intangible. And you can't necessarily write a policy that says that, but you can see it clearly when you see it. And there are so many different diversified activity that some of our 2-1Es do. And I think we should publicly say, and I'm standing in the Assembly to say, well done, thank you to the advisors and to the 2-1Es and to the people that work to the 2-1Es for the huge contribution that they're making to Jersey. They have choices about where they go. And if we say no, they go somewhere else. Is that good for our community? Is that good for our economy? Is that good for sport? Is it good for any of the other investments that they make? By the way, sir, members are under some sort of an illusion that they simply pay the tax contribution of the minimum tax contribution and the 1%. Anybody investing in Jersey in property pays 20% on their property. They're regarded as property developers. They pay 20%. It's like a capital gains tax. So if they are investing in housing sites, they pay 20%. I wonder how many members actually know that. I wonder how many members actually know the standardised rules, that it isn't the fact that there is one rule for one and one for another operating in their local economy. There isn't in relation to property development and other matters such as that. They pay tax at 20%. They have to. That's the rules, and they're stuck to. And under the chairmanship of our Chief Minister, I know that, and other colleagues that are on Haywag, they've said no. They've said no, they're not satisfied. They're being tough. Action, not words. And there is also discussion with the review, the fast review that the Treasury Minister is undertaking, to increase the minimum tax contribution so that we can get even more out of 2-1Es, because the international situation has changed. Let's carry on with the current scheme, with the arrangements that are within the budget. Let's look at it. Let the Haywag group, whatever it's called, forgive me, now change those criteria that it can, the policies that it should do, to further enhance the reputation of Jersey, further improve the situation of Jersey. Simply turning this off, as Deputy Mezek is suggesting to do, is not the right thing to do for Jersey. It's not the right thing to do for our financial services and trade-in services business. It's not the right thing to do for our not-for-profit sector. What is is action in terms of a review that has already been going on in the last few weeks. And maybe the Treasury Minister, maybe the Chief Minister will talk about some of the things that are being consulted on in terms of the review to further improve it. Whose side are members on, sir? Are they on the side of Jersey? Because it's of Jersey. I took my oath of office, sir, in relation to dealing with making decisions on my conscience of the interests of Jersey. And it's basically people that come here who have choices of other jurisdictions, and we are an expensive jurisdiction, let's be clear about that. We want those people to come and spend and create value, economic jobs, economic growth, the jobs of the future, in green finance, in funds areas. Deputy Tadia is doing that, sir. Yes, I want lots of money for Jersey. I want lots of money for public services, of people paying tax, well-paid taxes, people that saving money for the public purse in sports facilities and other aspects like that. That's what I want to see. That's why we brought in the arrangements in 2012. And they've been improved. First, every journey starts with a first step. It started in 2012. There were further steps made. There were some backward steps made in the last 4 years. Can't change that. But we can change the future, and we can change now. And we can change now by saying, actually, we're going to support the Chief Minister in her forensic, detailed review with other ministerial colleagues. We're going to support this additional increase that we've got coming later in the income tax law for those new people that are already coming in. They're going to be paying that minimum rate of tax. And then probably the Chief Minister is going to go further. And that's a really good thing, sir. And that's what's in the interests of Jersey. And so when I say, sir, respectfully, if members are wanting to support the Jersey economy, to send out a clear message that we're welcoming people who are going to contribute, then they will not approve Deputy Mezek's amendment, and they will support the government in their continued and fast work to improve further the economic interests of Jersey, the social interests of Jersey, and all the other things that we need to attend to in a massively difficult world. So I urge members to vote against the amendment, against the amendment by Deputy Mezek.
Thank you. Deputy Tom Binney.
Sir, I'm sorry to be doing this at this stage, but something's just sprung to mind by way of a declaration of interest, and I just seek your clarification. Deputy Rose Binney and I jointly own an apartment that we currently lease to a 21E. The lease comes up at towards the end of next year, and that may make it available for someone else who may happen to be a 21E. And I just wanted to clarify whether that conflicts us and whether we should withdraw from voting, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. You gave notice of this in the chat, and I did have an opportunity to mention this to the bailiff as well, that the view is that this is an interest to declare, as it were, which you have done, but that it's not an interest that would require you to withdraw from voting, because the amendment is seeking to close the scheme to new applications rather than to close it to existing high-value residents. So your interest has been declared.
That's fine. Thank you for the clarification, sir.
Did you wish to speak as well, Deputy Binney?
Otherwise, no, sir. That was just for the point of clarification. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Rob Ward, you had your light on.
Thank you, sir. And I'll be quicker than 10 minutes, 23 seconds, and a lot gentler. So there's a couple of points. First of all, in terms of sports funding, I think what all the sports, rugby and football and cricket want on this island is a truly sustainable, protected and secure source of funding, and actually not being reliant upon the goodwill of those who are extraordinarily wealthy and get a benefit coming over here. So actually, if you're going to develop that, that's what we should be developing, because it is not secure at the moment, and there's no certainty in the funding for sport too often. So let's clear with that one. And can we just get back to the amendment? Rather than all the tirades about, our love of the wealthy coming over and what they do for the island, this amendment is about suspending a scheme that we're all unsure about until the review comes out. That's what it's about. Because those 7 applicants may well be the wrong applicants. If the scheme is wrong, they could be allowed to come to the island under this scheme, which does not work, before the review comes out. The day after they said yes, the review comes out and says, actually, we shouldn't be doing it that way. But then we're stuck with people. This is about making sure that that scheme is right. The government knows they want to review it. They're saying they'll review it. Get on, review it. But suspend the scheme as you're doing it. To be quite frank, sir, for prudence in this scheme and for the good of islanders, they should have suspended the scheme until the review came out so we knew we were doing the right things. And I'll just read one other thing, it's a Freedom of Information request, just to give you the other side of the coin. In 2021, 93 people in income support had to take loans out from the income support department to pay for carpets in the new Andium homes. There's a context for you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputies, any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. And sir, I'd like to thank everyone who's spoken so far. It's been a very interesting debate. But I was just listening to Deputy Ward there, and I found it interesting. Apologies. Deputy Ward's a little cough there. So, found it interesting that he talked about prudence in a way to suggest that if this scheme continues today in the form that it is, there is some sort of major danger. But there isn't. All of the applications are looked at individually, not just by officers, but by all of the ministers on the Housing and Work advisory group. So there will be no one coming in between now and the end of the review that is being undertaken who isn't appropriate for this island, both in terms of their wealth, but also in terms of their social engagement and their community feel. And so in that sense, there isn't a need for prudence that Deputy Ward suggested, because we are all, as ministers, being very prudent. I found it very interesting that, and I understand why Deputy Mezek has brought this amendment to the government plan in many ways, because the question of the high value residency scheme is one that is shared by many islanders. You don't have to go far out of the doors of this building to find someone, if you were to ask them, who would question the value of the high value residency scheme, because it's a scheme that many islanders don't understand. Many states members don't understand. Many ministers, until they engage with it, also don't necessarily understand. And so it's totally natural that it is questioned here in the Assembly, because it is questioned out there in the streets of the island as well. But, sir, over the years, I have seen, as a States member, and as I have then come into government first as an assistant minister and then a minister, I have also seen the value that these people bring to the island. Many of them bring enormous value, not just financial value, but they engage so clearly with the community in many, many different ways. I'm seeing that in the culture and arts space. And Deputy Ward, at the very end of his speech there, was talking about sustainability of sport funding. And absolutely right, the sustainable element of funding will come from government investment. But there are other elements of funding, whether it's for capital projects, whether it's for particular events, where high-value residents are really keen to engage, and they are incredibly helpful where they do that as well. And that is exactly the same for the arts and culture and heritage as well, sir. So I have been heartened since I became Minister for Economic Development to see not only the work that is done within the departments looking after the high value residency scheme, to see the work that officers do to make sure that all the applications we see meet a certain standard, but also the engagement of ministers to firstly really want to understand the scheme and really want to understand how we can get a better scheme. We have had so many strong conversations where our views have been listened to by officers, by other ministers, as we look to seek to gain, not to throw out the scheme, but to improve on the scheme, to make sure that Jersey gets the value that it needs from this scheme, sir, so that high value residents deliver the value financially, socially to Jersey. And I am convinced that we have got to the right place, sir. We have got to a place where we are able to see a way forward that does bring greater financial value to Jersey, almost certainly will bring perhaps fewer applications, but those applications will be of a quality where we will all feel very comfortable that the people engaging are here to be economically active over a long period of their life, They are here to engage in the community and to support the community. They are here for the right reasons. I am convinced that we have got to that place, and I'm really pleased that the ministers that I work with around the table have also listened, and they've come on a journey. Some ministers started by saying, shortly after their elections, they'd say to me, let's just the scheme. And then by engaging and understanding it, they've grown to understand that there is value in this, and more importantly, there is even greater value that we can get from it, sir. So I do ask members to reject the amendment proposed by Deputy Mezek, because it will be, it will do no help to anybody whatsoever. All it will do is mean potentially some lost income for Jersey. Our review is already underway. We have very strong positions on it, sir, and we will be consulting on that, publishing on that, and pretty much by the middle of this year, there will be a new scheme, which I believe will show all islanders that there is value to be brought from this, sir. So, yes, please do reject this amendment. Thank you, sir.
Very much indeed. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Conor Tarbison,
Thank you, sir. For years, I have been persuaded by people like Deputy Joseph, Deputy Gorst, and other members who are no longer in the Assembly, that there is nothing at all wrong with what used to be called the 11K and is now called the 21E scheme. I have taken their reassurances that it's good for Jersey, and I've believed them completely, only to discover in more recent times that that hasn't always been the case. Not only have some people been allowed in under this ticket who we would have been better off not having living in the island, but the old argument which you so often used to hear about trickle-down economics clearly doesn't benefit everyone. It doesn't trickle down perhaps far enough. I always used to tell people who challenged me, particularly when abroad, about the ability of people to come here and avoid the housing restrictions that apply to everyone else. Well, the money they bring in benefits the economy hugely. It trickles down to benefit gardeners and plasterers and tilers and builders and so on. But the more people I speak to tell me that that isn't happening, and actually a lot of these tradespersons, and I can't really blame them, if I had to do a tiling job and move around every week or so, and I was being offered, someone said you can spend the whole year tiling my patio, I'd probably go for the latter offer, and the pay would be better as well. So there clearly is a problem that trickle-down argument is no longer applicable. I'm also very aware of the fact that what is being proposed here is not to close the door, it's actually a moratorium. We're being asked to just suspend new applicants while these principles are explored further and the reports are done. And I think really importantly, and I haven't decided yet which way I will vote, but really importantly, if this amendment were to be accepted, it would not devalue the contribution that has been made by past and present people who have come into Jersey under this option. You wouldn't be saying to them, stop putting money into sports, stop putting money into culture, because they're here and they're contributing. I have to say, again, this is, I don't know because I've not seen the report, there are people in this category who appear to come in for a weekend in the summer and perhaps a weekend at Christmas, and for the rest of the year, a large property is left empty. That may just be hearsay, but we don't know. And of course, members don't need reminding that the times have changed. We have a housing crisis. We have people who can't afford to move into the house of their dreams. And while this scheme is operating, that must surely be a bitter pill for them to swallow. We also have double-digit inflation, which is, again, making it very hard for ordinary islanders to access the services of the tradespeople they want in order to, because they can't afford to move, they want to do up their properties, but the tradespeople, some of them at least, appear to be busy working in these rather large mansions. So I think there are arguments that are worth listening to here, and I will follow the debate with interest, and I may even support the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Conor Tarbison Grooveville.
Thank you, sir.
Sadly, I have to admit, I returned from Horticultural College 41 years ago into an industry that was decimated and sadly lacked the support of this government. That was a government long ago, and since then, successive governments haven't supported it either. But what I'd like to say about this particular topic is I was very angry at that time as a young farmer about the number of properties around the island that were being lost to our industry. But as we know, the successive years, they would have been lost anyway, sir. And as a postman for 23 years, I got to deliver to these properties. And literally those properties would now be, and I use the term very literally, littering the countryside. Because those poor farmers that couldn't support those properties would have allowed them into disrepair. But now some of them are quite magnificent, and they're great credit to their parishes and to their owners. But sir, I've changed my mind completely in those 40 years. I am very fortunate enough to know two of these individuals, as Deputy Howell does as well. One of whom who's just paid for a tree planting scheme in the parish of Grooville, and who allowed 50 children from year 4 at Grooville School to go up and plant some trees. That's the sort of thing that these individuals can do. Another individual who's spending a great deal of money on his property from local building companies to turn it into an eco-house, and who has offered his software system to run a carbon offset tax over here in Jersey. So they are contributing, and I would like to say, so I cannot support this this proposition. Thank you, sir. Amendment, sorry.
Thank you very much, Conor Tarb. Deputy Scott.
Sir, I just wanted to express my support for the Minister of Economic Development in terms of his argument. I don't agree with I've actually explained already in respect of one proposition of the problems that we have with our economy. This is not the time to kick away one of the legs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Farnham.
Thank you, sir. It's become a great hobby of the new government to bash the last government, and of course that government probably bashed the government before that. But I just wanted to, just for the record, sir, say that the previous government did tighten up on the numbers. The Gorse government, the previous Gorse government, the Gorse-Joseph government, gave 85 permissions in their time, and the last government gave, I think, about, well, we've got 63 here and till June, so it's about 70, sir. And of course, during that time, the previous government increased the a lot of the conditions around coming in. So I just wanted to make that, sir, that point, sir, for the record. And also, I think it's absolutely essential we have a review of the scheme. There's absolutely no doubt that I think the scheme does, as previous reviews have shown, provide more benefits, more advantages and disadvantages. But of course, things change as times change and economies change. And I think a review is, I look forward to seeing the results, but I'm confident that we will see the scheme is beneficial to Jersey. So I agree with part of the amendment, sir, about the review, but I don't think it's actually necessary to have a moratorium at this stage. And I do understand that the new governments are carrying on the excellent work of the previous government and tightening up the scheme a little bit further, just to make sure it's appropriate for the island. Thank you.
Very much, deputies. Any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, I'd like if Deputy Mezek, in his summing up, could explain whether he is looking to suspend the current scheme, that is version 4, and that should the government bring a version 5 during 2023 to the State Assembly for approval, should the State Assembly approve that, he thinks that is an appropriate interpretation of the closure or suspension of the scheme. But now on to perhaps looking at one of the reasons why this is being proposed that it should be rejected, which is the impact on those existing applicants. And I think Deputy Tadeo was absolutely right and on the mark when he said we should consider fairness. And I'm glad Deputy Joseph has just returned, who asked us which side of Jersey we are on. And hopefully this example will tell him which side I am on. This is a real example. It's an example of a friend of mine who is Jersey born with almost, but not 10 years of life on Jersey. They came back a couple of years ago. They were trapped here during COVID. and they have no rights to work here. They have no rights to rent or to buy. They were stuck here, and they asked Social Security on the phone if there were any examples of special circumstances that would allow them to live with dignity on this island. They were told they had no right to appeal. None. Now, that's not true. If you read the Control of Housing Work Law, one can always appeal to the Minister, but this is what they were told. They were told there's no proof they were born here with a Jersey passport. On a further ask for an appeal, they were told, don't you know we're in the middle of a population crisis, followed by we can't just let anyone in. So these comments go on. They are for locally born people and people who come here with less than 10 years, but come here with good faith. So I would like us to think that we should be really addressing some of the roots of the problems of the Control and Housing Work Law, that allowing people who fall through the cracks to start being treated with compassion and support rather than being demonised or utterly dismissed. So if this government is looking at those 7 people and wondering the impact to their families and to their children who might work here, I would like them to start considering the many islanders who do live here, who are living day to day without homes and day to day without rights to work. And I think that is fairness.
Very much. Deputies, any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Mezek to respond.
Thank you, sir. I thank members who've contributed to this debate. There was a phrase that Deputy Morell used multiple times in his speech, which I want to come back on. He kept saying, don't understand, and he acknowledged that there are people out there in our society who have misgivings about this scheme, and then he carried on with that saying, don't understand, don't understand. And I should tell him that there are people who the precise reason that they dislike this scheme is because they do understand. So I spent 2 years of my life very closely connected to the application of this scheme. I've been through piles and piles of paperwork examining the fine print of applications when they were made, and had an active decision-making role in that scheme. And it is because of what I saw and what I understand from my close connection to that scheme that I feel incapable of supporting the scheme continuing until there is hard evidence on the table that the scheme can be improved and that those abuses of it, in my view, can be prevented. He said that there's now no one coming in who isn't appropriate, and Deputy Moore reminded us that it's a new HAWAG, and that's great, and I am pleased in the direction of travel that the Chief Minister has outlined in terms of thresholds and whatever. I completely support that. But it's not good enough to just say it's new people in charge now, so trust us, everything's better. We do need something more tangible to know that for sure things have improved. And I raised 3 examples of things that I am aware of occurring in my time at HAWAG that I have not had clear assurance of, that instructions have been given to officers both in the government and in Locate Jersey that are not to happen in future. Have they been told, do not present an application to us if it doesn't contain a complete police check? Have they been told, if somebody is applying through this scheme, but it's more appropriate that their employer applies for a licence, don't bother putting this application in front of us? And have they been told that if the applicant's spouse comes up with potential reputational concerns through background checks on them, or even a simple Google search, not to bother putting that application in front of us? We've not had any clear confirmation that that is the case. If new members of HAWAG are taking a more robust approach, I support that and welcome that, but words to assure us that that's the case is not the same as tangible evidence that improvements are being made in these processes, and that would have been helpful to have seen that. So speaking of tangible evidence, I move on to comments from Deputy Stevenson about experiences of sports organisations out there and the support they occasionally get from 2&Es. So I'm sorry, but that's nothing but anecdotal. It may well be the case that there's plenty of examples that we can find and evidence that it happens, but it is a mere It is a mere closed view on one particular thing that somebody encounters through their life experience. It's not data. Data is what matters. How many of these people are contributing? How much are they contributing? If we don't know that, but we say, oh, I happen to know a sporting group that got donations, that is not hard enough evidence to make a proper decision on. What I do remember, sir, from my time on Haywag, is there were I would say, a disproportionate number of applications that with their cover letter included some reference to rugby. There were a very large number that were coming to us for approval, where they said in their letter that their intention was in some form or another to get involved in supporting rugby on the island. And I remember the then Senator Steve Pallett putting his hand up and saying, why do they never come offering to support netball? I have to say that if it's really the case that our sports organisations there are dependent on the completely voluntary and unreliable, ultimately, charitable contributions from people who come to Jersey for financial reasons to survive, I'm actually worried about that. I think our sports organisations deserve to have a more reliable and sustainable funding source to enable them to thrive and enable our young sportsmen and women to have the opportunities without having to rely on unreliable donations from people who, purely from getting up on a different side of the bed in the morning may decide that day we're not going to give donations. They're perfectly within their rights to do that. That's not a good way of ensuring that our sporting organisations get funding. And I think that that really goes back to the central point of this scheme, to bring in revenue that we otherwise wouldn't have if those people weren't here. Is that really a safe and stable way of funding our public services, to rely on the occasional person coming forward to move to Jersey for the tax advantages, and without that scheme, Jersey is left worse off? I personally find that very worrying. So Deputy Curtis asked a very specific question about version 5 of this and where this amendment would lead that. So, of course, if we get to the point where the government has completed a review and has proposals about how it wants to continue with it in whatever form that may be, it's perfectly within their rights to come to the Assembly and ask for our approval at that point, and we can make a judgment on that, and whatever decision we make will stand. Deputy Joseph, one of his more animated speeches since his re-entry into this Assembly, and I just have to say that I wish people would get as exercised about helping some of the poorer and more marginalised people in our society than they do about protecting the tax privileges for the very few. That's not the politics that I share, and I find that very disappointing. So the very last point I'll make in reference to a point the Chief Minister made early on in this is that she attempted to compare Reform Jersey's positions on this subject compared to previous positions she's taken, and I think she has misunderstood them. So our manifesto very clearly says in it on page 11, we will suspend the high value residence scheme until a full and comprehensive cost benefit review has been undertaken. That is precisely what this amendment does. She points out that another amendment we brought to the mini budget had a clause in it specifically excluding Tooheys from it. And I can tell her very simply why that's the case. It's because they're two separate issues. And there had to be a specification in that amendment that it didn't apply to Tooheys because of the complications that would put in it, when it was not the point of that budget amendment to affect Tooheys. That's to be dealt with later, which is what this is. So there's no inconsistency in that position, sir. So before calling for the appel, I would ask members to consider what message it sends out to allow a scheme which it seems like everybody agrees is suboptimal to continue whilst a review goes on, when those applications that have currently been put in under the current rules, 7 or so I think the Chief Minister said there was, I remind members that none of those 7 has a right to come to Jersey. To come to Jersey is a privilege through this scheme, not a right. And if we democratically decide actually the rules we currently have aren't quite good enough for what Jersey deserves, we're going to improve them, we can say to those 7, if you're still interested, come back when the new rules are in place, but the new rules will more closely reflect what the people of Jersey want and how we value the criteria which people have to meet to come into the island. They have no right to come here under the current rules. There's nothing wrong in democratically saying, sorry, we're suspending this for a moment because we think Jersey deserves better. They should not have any expectation whatsoever that their application be accepted. And whether it's good faith or bad faith has nothing to do with that. The scheme is meant to be for our benefit, not the applicant's benefits. So, and on that, I call for the appel.
That is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the 19th Amendment, suspension of high-value residence. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been defeated, 15 votes pour, 33 votes contre, 1 abstention.
15 and 1, please.
Those members voting for, the Connétable, St Brelard and St Martin, Deputies Southern, Tadier, Lehegara, Rob Ward, Alves, Mesick, Coles, Porre, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Jern, Kovac and Alex Curtis. And the abstention, the Connétable St Helier.
Well, the next item of public business is the 11th Amendment, ring-fence stamp duty, lodged by Deputy Andrews. Main responder will be the Minister for Treasury and Resources, and I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph I. After the words Appendix 3 to the report, insert the words, except that on page 35 of Appendix 3, after the words further changes to stamp duty, insert the words which would include the provision that stamp duty raised on properties exceeding £2.5 million will be ring-fenced to provide funding for assisted home ownership schemes, such provision to be implemented by the 1st of January 2024.
Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. Now, I have been very concerned about our young generation. And many of our young generation, they are in rented accommodation and they aspire to be homeowners. However, what we have seen is our housing market be in a position of partial market failure. There is distortion in our housing market in prices relative to households and households' income, and also their ability to save a sufficient amount to afford a downward payment. What that means is that many households continue to be renters. And also, sir, many households, especially among the lower and middle decile households in our island, continue to have a disproportionate amount of their income be spent as expenditure on rent. And that is a problem, sir, because again, there has been a shortfall in investment in building more housing supply. And of course, this has exacerbated our problems in terms of demand pull inflation, where prices keep on going up. It means the reality of becoming a homeowner is again becoming ever more diminished. And something must be done. Now, I am a firm believer in positive liberty, sir. What that means is actually the government has to be the enabler. We have to provide a provision. There are provisions in other jurisdictions where the government is involved. The government has actually taken the initiative. The government will provide home ownership schemes. Now, if we are to look at the UK, the Help to Buy equity loan scheme, for instance, is one method of assisting home ownership. Now, the mechanism that is in place is to provide support to those who are trying to access home ownership. In London, there's a 40% equity loan that is available for households to support them. But it must be said, sir, if we are looking at the government providing a shared equity scheme, for instance, sir, it means that also, sir, there is a reduced level of capital repayments throughout the tenure of the debt obligation being made payable as well, sir. It is about assisting households. It's about making sure that they have the ability to match bank lenders' criteria that they set. And it also means that the government has to build a relationship with the banks, domestically, sir. Because we all need to be in this together. And actually, sir, what we are seeing at the moment is Jersey become very much a liberal meritocracy. It is all about individual mobility. And actually, what we have not seen is the government be the interventionist. We have not seen the government develop any strategies. And as I mentioned, sir, yesterday, the importance that the government takes a proactive, long-term and sustainable approach. Because, sir, the thing with politicians is every 4 years we have to go through an election. And as we have actually seen in the June election, sir, there was a huge turnaround. The Council of Ministers, most of them were not re-elected. And they were not re-elected on the basis that they were not being reactive and not reflecting the interests of the Jersey people. And Jersey's housing crisis is our biggest problem. And certainly, sir, this Assembly needs to do something about it. Because if we don't, in time, the public will start to resent us as a collective. And that cannot be the case. Now, we have the opportunity, and we need to do something. And we need to do something as a collegiate assembly. Now, I find, sir, it has become ever more difficult this early on, because there is an imbalance in the assembly in terms of where politicians stand. Now, for me, I am very clear what I stand for, and I do believe that, yes, sir, the government has to provide a provision. And hence why I have come into this government plan, and I have come in with a number of amendments, because it's vital that the electorate who voted me in see that I am actually being proactive, I'm being innovative with policy, and I'm trying to drive progress forward. And I think that is very important here. There is a clear intent, and I hope members support me on this basis. Because not only have I come up with a plan, I am proving where the source of funding is coming from. And that is also the important thing in terms of what I have done with this amendment, sir. Because often politicians are questioned, where is the source of funding? Well, it's here. It's explicitly written in my amendment, sir. It is very clear that, sir, some members are bound to support me because they see the importance of our young generation being able to enter home ownership. And also, we need to recognise this. Once you have paid off your mortgage obligation, no longer do you have an explicit rent. The income that is yours is actually going to be income savings. It's going to accumulate. You're going to see a positive net wealth increase. Now compare that if the government doesn't do anything and you end up becoming a perpetual renter for the rest of your life. And that is going to happen more and more. The linearity between young generation and home ownership is becoming weaker. I compare it to my grandparents, sir, and their friends, many of whom are homeowners. When I compare it to my parents who were born in the late 50s and early 60s, again, the relationship becomes weaker. And for me, being a 30-year-old man, many of my friends are probably going to be perpetual renters. Indeed, myself, I probably will end up becoming a renter for the rest of my life. But actually, I don't really want to enter home ownership because, you know what, I'm here on the basis of that. My main priority is to represent the interests of my electorate. And sir, I look forward to the contributions that my fellow members will bring before the Assembly. Thank you, sir.
Very much indeed. Is the amendment seconded? Any member wish to speak? Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. And I'd just like to say thank you very much to Deputy Andrews for bringing this to the Assembly. We as a government are obviously clearly interested in long-term, proactive and sustainable approach to housing, and I absolutely want at the front centre of that approach. So setting aside any income from stamp duty increase to support housing initiatives is a very thoughtful of Deputy Andrews, and I thank him for trying to do the right thing. Sadly, however, setting aside cash to inject into the housing market isn't, as I've found, quite as simple as it sounds. I already have £10 million in this government plan. That is £10 million which previous ministers have been unable to spend. Spending this money will require great care. The Fiscal Policy Panel's advice is clear. Despite the rising costs of housing, we should be very careful about interventions which boost short-term housing demand and support prices artificially. I'll be working hard to find out the right balance with the £10 million to allow us to support islanders into home ownership. And I take this point about perpetual renters and that challenge. So we've got to support islanders into home ownership, but without stoking the market at a time we need it to come down. I naturally find it very hard to say no to the prospect of more money being available for this purpose, but as an Assembly, we must be prudent. The £10 million already secured will be hard to spend, but I will endeavour, and I assure Deputy Andrews, to spend it and spend it well. When more is needed, I'll be sure to ask of it. In the meantime, I sadly cannot support the ring fencing of money that might otherwise be used to support islanders through the housing and cost of living crisis in ways other than to assist with private house purchases. Again, I wish to thank Deputy Andrews for his well-intended amendment, but unfortunately I'm unable to support this.
Very much. Deputy Mayor. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I like Deputy Andrews. He reminds me of a younger version of me.
Sir, point of order, sir.
A point of order?
Sir, I didn't know we were allowed to mislead the House there.
Sadly, that's not a point of order, as it's not a matter on which I can rule.
So I normally say that he's only a year younger than me. He's actually a year and a half younger than me, but I prefer to round down in that instance. But seriously though, so when he spoke of his experience as a 30-year-old person and prospects of home ownership versus renting, he's talking about the aspirations of a lot of people in Jersey, and I recognise in what he said exactly how many of my friends feel, many of whom are actually losing hope in a future in Jersey and are leaving as a result of that. I've many friends already who have moved to parts of the UK where they've found a much cheaper cost of living and much easier aspirations in terms of home ownership, rather than staying in Jersey and either having to live with their parents and all of the difficulties that comes with that as you get older for a long time, or end up paying rent to other people, to pay off other people's investments for which they'll never see a penny back come to them. So I welcome what Deputy Andrews is trying to do to provide some form of mechanism for topping up a fund to be able to support home ownership through shared equity. In terms of what voting position I take on that, it's extremely easy for me to find that because it's in the manifesto I stood on, where we very clearly said that we wanted to help provide revenue into a fund to support shared equity for young people to own their homes, and one of the mechanisms we would do that would be through higher rates of stamp duty. So I congratulate Deputy Andrews for getting there before even we did on this. Good work there. So the reference was made to the £10 million funding, or pot of money that there is waiting to be spent to support people into home ownership. So that originated in my time in a previous government plan, and for various reasons hasn't been able to be used at this point. That was, I think, offered in the first instance essentially as a holding pot of money, that it was taken at a time where it could be acquired but without a specification for exactly what kind of scheme it would go towards funding. There wasn't a specification about whether it would be a loan scheme or shared equity or purchasing land or anything like that. It was quite open. And as time has gone on, I've certainly come to the view that that would be best used, that fund, through setting up some form of shared equity scheme to enable young people to buy a majority stake in their homes. And then if they choose to buy the final portion of it, that can then be recycled through that fund so that future generations can benefit from it as well. And Deputy Andrews' amendment will provide extra money going into it as a funding stream that will be perpetual as a result of that, and therefore more and more people can be helped with it. That doesn't have to be the only way that you fund it. You can, of course, come back in future government plans and say from some other pot we'll throw in another few million to support it. And the Housing Minister sounded like that was a possibility for what may happen depending on how that initial £10 million gets used. But when the housing crisis is as bad as it is, and with young people losing hope in the way they are in the dream of having a decent future in the island, where they have the stability that home ownership provides them, I fail to see why putting some extra funding into that fund will be a bad thing. It provides the government at least with a bit more money to reach more people. There was another member in a previous debate, I can't remember if it was Deputy Andrews or another one, who referred to a previous scheme that existed, I think in like 2012 or something like that. Okay, he's nodding his head, so it was him, and he said the number of people who benefited from it, I think it was 50-something. I mean, that's a small number of people. We need a scheme in place that's going to benefit a lot more people than that. But by doing it through a mechanism like this, and by doing it through shared equity, I think you get the best value for money for it. It's better than a loan scheme, because ultimately, that is still debt for young people to take on, many of whom will still be paying back their student debt, which, let's not forget, previous generations didn't have to endure. So, another weight holding them down. And it also would hopefully, provided you put decent controls in place about the types of property that they can buy with this, trying to exclude investors and make it exclusively for those prospective homeowners, then you can also, then I think that mechanism would be less inflationary than a loan type scheme. So I congratulate Deputy Andrews on bringing this amendment forward, and he has our wholehearted support for it.
Thank you very much. Does any other member wish to speak on this amendment? Or the Deputy Tadier?
Thanks. So quickly, I also share the admiration for this for Deputy Andrews. I like to think of him as a more articulate, younger version of myself. I'm waiting for the point of order, sir. And it has to be said, when we came up with this, because it's strange to have, in some ways, an ally in the Assembly, not on everything, but I think who's independently come to similar positions. And when we initially looked at this, we thought, okay, we went through some of the similar questions that the Minister was asking, what should our position be on this? It seems to be doing all the right things. It's raising money. It's ring-fencing money. How do we feel about ring-fencing? That's not necessarily always a process that we would entirely always espouse. Ring-fencing can be problematic. We generally have a system where we have taxation which goes into a big pot. But there are clearly examples of when ring-fencing is appropriate. And of course, what we did is we came back to our fundamental values as a party, and also our manifesto. It's really helpful to have a manifesto, actually, where you can go back to. And then we looked at our addressing the housing crisis part of the manifesto. And one of the bullet points is to establish a fund to support first-time buyers to enable them to purchase their homes through shared equity. So it's very similar to what Deputy Andrews is proposing here. It's a fund, it's to support first-time buyers. I don't think he necessarily limits it or prescribes what kind of scheme it will go to. But I think clearly that's something which is in line with our manifesto. And we didn't just say, incidentally, in principle we support this, we support it in practice as well. So there's no getting round what our manifesto says and the values that we espouse. And it would be quite easy to, of course, find a reason saying, well, we're not sure that this is the perfect solution. We don't like the ring fencing, or we think there's another tweak which is not quite right. This is about supporting general values. And certainly in my personal manifesto as well, I concentrated on 3 areas of healthcare, heritage and housing. Those were the 3 areas. And I noticed, like many members of this assembly, that on the doorstep, for those of us who were going around knocking on doors, and I think it was most of us anyway, is that housing came up as a big issue. Even members of the public who do own their own houses, who have been well established in the island, know that they've got children and grandchildren living in the island, or possibly living away and not being able to come back, or looking to move away, for whom home ownership is not even an aspiration, it's more of a pipe dream. So what I would say to the Minister for Housing is, okay, £10 million is a nice problem to have. He said he doesn't know how to spend it. I don't know if that's because that's too much or not enough. But surely there must be ways that that can be spent, and he should be welcoming, I would suggest, a proper establishment of a fund with a funding stream whereby that pot can be increased, and he can extend whatever mechanisms that he wishes as a policy lever. Because let's face it, he's a minister, and it's not specifically in this iteration, he's a minister without much of a department. He has an Andium Homes arm's length organisation. There are also trusts that deliver housing. But he needs to have policy, and he needs to presumably have some kind of funding mechanisms to use in the wider policy portfolio that he can affect change with. And I would say maybe a good start, this is just a personal opinion, is that £10 million he could use to start buying up green fields. Because that's what I think property developers are doing in the island anyway. They've been doing it for decades. They've also been sitting on property such as glass houses, which are derelict, which they're hoping that one day, and maybe it will come from this particular government, they'll get a windfall that they can develop them. I'd say buy as many of those green and brownfield sites as you can now at agricultural rates, and keep them like that for a few years, and maybe return them to agriculture. And if there is a compelling reason in the future, who knows what can be done with that. Imagine what you could do with a bigger pot if you support Deputy Andrews today. But certainly it can come for schemes, even if it's just deposit schemes, helping young people buy deposits. But it's important that those schemes that they end up with are not just helping younger people or first-time buyers buy houses which are ultimately unaffordable, which then get resold into the open market. Those are the mistakes that got made in the past. It's really important that if this amendment is passed today and when that fund is established, those houses remain affordable in perpetuity. And I think that's the problem that we saw in the past. So I am certainly very happy to support what Deputy Andrews is doing here, and I think we should support both the underlying principle as well as the well thought out funding scheme that he's got to accompany it.
Does any other member wish to speak on this amendment? No other member wishes to speak? Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir, and I don't want to touch too much on the housing issue because much that has been said I find little to disagree with, and the Housing Minister has been quite clear. But accountants are a bit boring, particularly on a Thursday evening, and money can only be spent once. And so when the mover of the proposition says that a funding source has been found, that is only half of the picture, because what the amendment does is take money raised from stamp duty and takes it from the Consolidated Fund and puts it into the Housing Development Fund. Now, the money in the Consolidated Fund, as members will know, is allocated for all of the everyday general revenue expenditure. And it all gets collected. It gets basic accounts, as you know. The money gets collected by income tax, corporation tax, GST, stamp duty, and other duties, and goes into a pot. That's why the Fiscal Policy Panel, independent economists say don't, if you can avoid it, use hypothecated funds. And then it is allocated in a budget process to departments to spend. And through that process, we come up with a balanced budget. What this amendment does is say before that money gets into the consolidated fund, put it into a hypothecated fund to do all of the good things that I think members will all agree with. What that means is that that money is not available for the purposes to which it has been allocated, which is general revenue spend, which could be, as we know, any number of good things that the government does. But more fundamentally, it causes the consolidated fund, that is the public's current account, to go overdrawn. As soon as this comes into play, as the Deputy asks us to do at the beginning of 2024, it says that our current account will be overdrawn, and it will be overdrawn again in 2025. Now, as you know, sir, the finance law does not allow any Treasury Minister to present a government plan where the current account is overdrawn in any of the years of the government plan. Sadly, it does allow members to bring forward amendments that cause the current account to go overdrawn. And it is for that reason that I cannot support the Deputy's amendment. I don't think that the allocation in the way that the Deputy is seeking to amend is prudent, nor is it returning us to sound money, which I think members do want to see. That's not to say, and I'm sure that the Housing Minister is of the same view, he's got 10 million, which I know the Deputy wants to encourage him to spend in 2023. I want to encourage him to spend in 2023, and I've told him to get on and do it along the lines of the way that the Deputy wishes to see. And if he can get on and spend that money, then in 2024 we can work to balance our books, but have a proper conversation about where that money should come from so that the current account is not overdrawn. Because as the Deputy is a scholar of economics, he knows that the government has limited options when the current account is overdrawn. It's overdrawn, it can take its money from its savings account that we call the strategic reserve, or it can go to the markets and borrow money in order to fund this scheme. I don't think either of those are attractive, but I am absolutely prepared to work with the Deputy, as I know the Housing Minister is, to during the course of 2023 come forward to make sure that the intention behind his amendment, which is to make sure that there is a longer term funding scheme which is within balanced budgets to provide for what he wishes to provide for with shared equity and all of those good things, looking at schemes that have gone before. And it's for those reasons, so not for the principle of what he's trying to achieve with housing, but simply it would be unsound from a management of public finances perspective. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Minister, does any other member wish to speak on this amendment? Deputy Bob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I don't know if it's just positive self-image, but see, I see myself as a younger version of Deputy Andrews. But anyway, just one very small point to be made. I think you have to think long-term with a scheme like this, and I definitely support it. And we have to remember very quickly, if we enter in a shared ownership equity partnership with people trying to buy their own homes, that equity increases in price, and actually we as a States Assembly get something back as well. So you have to think about that as an investment as well. So this is actually a very good use of that money that has a return on it, deals with an issue that is a really pressing issue for everybody and might improve some people's lives. Just that very quick point, sir. Thank you.
Much. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak? I close the debate and call upon Deputy Andrews to respond.
Thank you, sir. Now, I know Deputy Gorst, he mentioned about a transfer from a consolidated fund to the Dwelling Housing Loan Fund. Now, that was just something that was a suggestion within the amendment that was explicitly stated. Now, I think it's important that, yeah, he did mention about Jersey's primary budget surplus position. So essentially, this is where we are looking at the income being increased. So there's not actually a budget surplus deficit. But also what we have to recognise is in 2021, we had a net asset position growth of 481 million. Okay, I think that is a very substantial number. And also, our reserves have been performing very well too. So actually, because we are a legislative assembly, and because we actually have a very flexible constitution, it gives us the flexibility to bring something back to the assembly to actually ensure, okay, for instance, that there is contingencies in place as well. Now, it's quite difficult when you're looking at this backbench that we have. I think Reform are very well organised. There's 10 members, and they each know what one another is doing. Now, with the rest of us as 18 independents, so when we are bringing forward propositions and amendments, we are unaware of the propositions and amendments only once they have been lodged. And I think actually when we are looking from an expenditure point of view, sometimes, yes, there can be issues where there are maybe 4 or 5 amendments that have been brought forward where actually we could be incurring expenditure if us as a legislative assembly, as a body, agree to it. But I also think as well, it's important that I mention what Deputy Waugh said. And he mentioned about the 10 million allocation. And once again, what's going to happen once it's exhausted? That's it. Look what happened in 2012. 51 households were supported, and then nothing was carried through. And how many members are still with us from that assembly? Probably not many. And again, what happens? We decide, oh, let's try and bring something forward again. And actually, we are just repeating history. A £10 million budget allocation. Here, we are generating revenue to be actually relative to expenditure. And actually, that's something that the fiscal policy panel did mention in terms of the revenue that will be generated has to relate and correspond to the level of expenditure, okay, that will be incurred. And that was something that was mentioned, I think, in the June or July report of the fiscal policy panel. Now, it's also important to mention, it was mentioned in The Guardian, I think it was, the base rate will be increasing to 3.5%. Now, that means those who are entering the market and when they are agreeing contracts, their debt obligations will be increasing because there's going to be increased interest rates. Now, that is going to probably be an argument that some members might be thinking, well, we can't do it now. This is about longevity. This is about sustainability, as I've just mentioned. And actually, if we are not willing to do anything, how are the public going to perceive us? I think they're probably going to perceive us quite negatively as an assembly. How can this be rejected? This is actually probably one of the first times where we've actually had a scheme proposed in this assembly, okay, that is connecting right to the issue. It's addressing the issue. It's about supporting people. It's about supporting islanders, our young generation, who again are part of Generation Exodus. They're not really generation renters, are they? They're Generation Exodus, because that's what's been happening ever since COVID. It's happening time and time again. And again, what did the last assembly do? They just sat there. They tried to seek re-election. And again, what happened to the alliance? It was a wipeout. And actually, sir, I think that was quite telling. Because how many times did they vote against progressive measures? I can't actually count. It was so many times. But the matter of it is, sir, we have to be the enabler, and we have to take a different approach. Because if we do not take a different approach, what we will be seeing is Jersey's undersupply of labour. It will become worse. And when we mention about capacity in our labour market, well, yes, we are not actually at full capacity because actually there are so many vacancies in our labour market because actually we cannot find the labour due to the cost of living. And also, it's important to mention when we are looking at explicit rents, when we're looking at the banks and the agreements that they set with their clients. In some cases, many people are in a position of negative savings, and they don't actually have the ability to save if they are, for instance, in a dwelling that belongs to a landlord, hypothetically, because they are market rates that have to be made payable, and it's the tenant who is responsible for incurring those rates. And actually, it is just a perpetual life in rented accommodation. It's not exactly fun, is it? if you don't have the ability to save. And actually, many islanders are living a very impoverished life, despite the fact that we might be saying, yes, they have relatively decent incomes. But actually, because the distortion in our housing market is so exacerbated, it's becoming so problematic. Because actually, the level of savings for middle and lower income Jersey households is so diminutive. And actually, they are not able to afford the stamp duty rates that are applied. Maybe there are exemptions in some cases if we're speaking about first-time buyers. However, it's becoming ever more difficult. We don't have any flexibility as well for first-time buyers in terms of stamp duty payments potentially being more flexible and being covered over a number of years. And I think that's also something, sir, that we need to be looking into as well. Because as it remains, I spoke to one couple who told me they had to actually save for about 8 or 9 years for the deposit, but also the stamp duty charge as well. It's very, very difficult. And here, I'm bringing forward a plan, an actual plan that can deliver a continued stream of success where households will no longer be in rented accommodation. They will be entering home ownership. They will be able to also own their own home, eventually with no debt obligation, once the debt obligation has been made payable. And that's when people will be able to enjoy their life, have a good life in retirement, be able to go on holiday. These are the other components that we also have to think about. And I don't think we are looking at it intricately enough. And so, I do hope that members will back me, and I do hope that members also recognise, despite the result, whatever it will be, I will say this, the Council of Ministers, the message is very clear. We need to do something, because if we do not do something this term, the public will ask, well, why did you vote against that amendment? Because we could have done something, and we could have actually allowed so many households to become homeowners by now. But you rejected it. So, sir, I will leave it there, and I will respect the vote, as I should, and I will call for the appel. Thank you.
That is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Vote is on the 11th Amendment, ring-fence stamp duty. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been defeated, 17 votes pour, 32 votes contre, no abstentions.
Those members voting for the Conotab of St Helier, St Lawrence, St Martin and St Clement. Deputies Southern, Tadier, Rob Ward, Alves, Farnham, Mesick, Coles, Porray, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Kovac, Andrews, and the Conotab of St Saviour.
Well, the next item for debate is the 22nd Amendment, GST on sanitary products, lodged by Deputy Feltham, and the main respondent will be the Chief Minister. I ask the greffier to read that amendment.
Page 2, paragraph I. After the words Appendix 3 to the report, insert the words, except that on page 37, the words "the wider scheme, which was noted in the mini-budget, replaces and improves the commitment made by the Assembly in P66 of 2022, should be substituted with the following words. The Assembly's decision made to exempt all menstrual sanitary products from GST will, however, be respected unless a specific proposition rescinding that decision is brought forward and adopted by the Assembly."
Deputy Felton.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to aim to keep this very quick, as I'm aware we've got a lot to get through. And thank you, sir, for your ruling, which confirms that the wording that is in the current government plan would in fact rescind a previous decision of the Assembly that was taken less than a year ago, which is actually one of the reasons why I brought this amendment. For me, the government plan is not the place to make this type of decision. This amendment is not about whether or not you agree that GST should be taken off of sanitary products. We don't have the time or the patience to decide such a policy change at this point in time. And I was quite surprised actually to see in just one single paragraph the government suggesting that we should be rescinding a previous decision of the Assembly, particularly as the government is suggesting that what they are proposing will be a better outcome for islanders. There is no evidence within the government plan or with any reports supplied by the government to confirm that what is being presented is better. The government has been undertaking a consultation which was completed only, I think, about 3 weeks ago. The Assembly has not seen the results of that consultation, and we do not know at this point in time whether what is being offered is better for the people. In fact, I was only contacted by a constituent a matter of days ago who had tried to access the products at 2 different sites, and she confirmed to me that there was only one type of product available and that the availability was what might be considered to be suitable for a single person. So it seems that what's being offered at the moment isn't what the government is promising. So I ask who this is better for. I note that nothing seems to have changed since the original proposition was made. It's interesting to me that the arguments being made by government are very, very similar to the arguments that were made by the previous Social Security Minister at the time. In my view, nothing has changed. The previous Social Security Minister, during that debate, said it was her intention to make products free in some spaces. But more importantly, what I was concerned about when I read that paragraph in the government plan is the precedent that this sets. The precedent of the government overturning Assembly decisions at a point when it may be easy for members to not notice, when it may be easy for them to not have time to fully consider, and it does not give time for proper debate to inform members as to why they should U-turn on their previous decision. This could have been a proposition brought by any member. So just because this particular proposition had been brought by the Chief Minister when she was a backbencher shouldn't sway us in that matter, because many existing States members who are here today spoke passionately in favour of this proposition, and they deserve the right to have this rescindment brought in a right and fair manner. I ask you to think for yourself how you would feel this time next year if you have fought hard in this Assembly to win a proposition, if you have spoke passionately in favour of a proposition, and then the government next year, in a single paragraph, seeks to rescind it. That is not the type of precedent that I think we should be setting. I don't think that's acceptable. Sir, I propose the amendment.
Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. And I too am grateful for your ruling in respect of this amendment. Firstly, if I could start perhaps with the suggestion that this is an unfortunate precedent and was in any way hidden. I refute that, and I do think that it's absolutely within the rights of both Assembly members and the government to approach the Assembly to ask for rescindment of previous decisions. I think there are plenty of them on my list. This is one, and a relatively minor one in my view, but it most certainly wasn't hidden, and in fact I think I remember quite clearly discussing it with scrutiny, and I think that is absolutely the right and proper way to do this. Of course, when I did bring the proposition to the previous Assembly to argue for the removal of GST, I did so with a view to proposing a particular measure that I thought at the time was quite simple, but of course now that I find myself in this position, I understand fully that it is the simpler and also the most effective thing to do to offer sanitary menstrual products for free, because this makes a greater difference to those who need them. A 5% reduction in that cost, firstly, might not be passed on to the consumer in the first instance, and secondly, does not make a huge amount of difference to the cost. So although it was largely a symbolic move, and one that I was so pleased to have gained the acceptance of the previous Assembly, I do think that this delivery of free sanitary products to islanders is a far more effective and expedient way. I'm grateful to Deputy Feltham for her feedback, and I was exchanging glances with the Social Security Minister at that point, and we will endeavour to find out exactly what those issues are. My understanding is that there is a variety of products that will be made available to members of the public, including standard products, but also more sustainable and reusable products that I think are very much desired by particularly younger members of our community. And I hope that members will vote against this amendment and support the government and the free provision of menstrual sanitary products to islanders going forward.
Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. Yes, if I could just follow up a little on the Chief Minister's comments. I'm very sorry that Deputy Feltham's constituent had that experience of not being able to find products. I have emailed the team now to say what's happening, because when I have been shown the stocks, they have been plentiful, so I'm not quite sure why that's happened. I would also say the consultation only recently closed, and the purpose of the consultation is to work out exactly what people want and to get feedback. The feedback from other jurisdictions is that people want a variety of very traditional products, and that's why we started with that. We will be meeting with people. I have a meeting arranged in January with people to discuss sustainable products. And I would also, just casting back to our recent discussion on the removal of GST, there was some documentation from policy advisors in the UK which proved that 80% of the GST reduction that was taken off in England was not passed on. So I do remain of the view, like the Chief Minister, that providing free products for cases of need is a much more effective solution than taking off a few pennies which may not be passed on. But we are continuing to work very hard on making sure this system works. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Tanya.
So this is problematic. Not the government's position is problematic, not just from a political point of view, but also a procedural one. And I think it's really important that we do look firstly at the procedure and the precedent that it sets, because it does set a precedent. It's not. This hasn't been made up. And secondly, there's been an attempt to rewrite history here, because I sat through the debate. I sat where Deputy Southern is sitting, well, actually where on the back row, and Deputy Martin, who was the Social Security Minister, was sitting where Deputy Southern is sitting now. We could see and hear very clearly what the policy was and what the reaction was to Senator Moore then, who was sitting over there in the constables' benches. And the arguments that were given on the day were exactly the same arguments against what Senator Moore was proposing from the Social Security Minister. So let's remind ourselves of exactly what happened there. So, and anyone who's got a different recollection who is here, by all means correct me if I'm wrong. So we have a proposition lodged by then Senator Moore saying period products should be free, and I hope I'm using the right phraseology there. I've been pulled up on Twitter previously for not using them, but I think period products is the preferred wording. And the Social Security Minister says, no, you don't need to make these GST exempt. And that was the proposition, to make them GST exempt, because I'm going to make them free. Therefore, hoping the argument, taking the argument, pulling the rug from under the feet of then Senator Moore. But in spite of that, this Assembly, Senator Moore continued to argue for the principle of removing GST from period products, and the whole of the Assembly, the majority of that Assembly, agreed with the argument that even though at some point in the future the government was going to make these products free, that we would still remove GST, and that's what Senator Moore asked us to do. And many of us made robust arguments supporting her for that, despite the fact that the products would also be free. And we made those arguments on the basis that not everyone was going to be able to access the free products or would necessarily want to access them at the points at which they were free. So when Deputy Feltham talks about a feeling of betrayal, I certainly feel that betrayal, because I did make that decision in good faith with the majority of the Assembly. And I don't think we can simply say, because it's the same person who moved the proposition who has now ended up in a position of power as Chief Minister, and the advice she's being given from officers is the same as what she was given when she was opposed. Of course it's the same advice, because it's effectively the same officers who are working at Social Security. They've not changed. The position is not going to have changed. But the position of government seems to have changed, and this is what I can't get my head around. And it shouldn't be for Deputy Feltham to need to lodge an amendment here to rescind something that the government no longer wants to do. It should be that the Chief Minister should be bringing a rescindment back and explaining that. And in the absence of any rescindment, sir, the government should be getting on and implementing their own policy. It's a completely bizarre situation. Can you imagine a similar situation in which Deputy Mezek would have brought a proposal, he would have won it, and then when he ends up as Chief Minister, he decides that he doesn't want to do it, even though he's got a duty and a direct, not mandate, but a direct instruction from the Assembly to do that thing. It's complete fantasy politics, and it sets very dangerous precedents when that happens. So I do feel that sense of betrayal that Deputy Feltham talks about. It may seem like a very small thing here, but I think it's fundamentally important what we're talking about today. So I hope members will appreciate that and support what Deputy Feltham's asking for.
Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. I'm not able to speak as elegantly as Deputy Tadier, but I remember this debate very well, and I remember how I voted on this debate. The only difference between previous debate and debate today that we didn't trust the government that will supply free periodic products. And it has been raised during the debate that, oh, don't remove GST, we will provide it free. I remember me personally not trusting government and saying, it's not the proposition in front of us. It's not something that we are debating. And this was my main reason to vote with then Senator Moore and her suggestion, because we didn't have an option of free product. It was just the promise. Currently, we have this clarity. We do supply free periodic products. It's completely different situation to the debate that we had previously. Thank you. And I understand, by the way, I thank you for Deputy Feltham, because I do believe we need to go through some procedures, and this is in the government plan. I'm not saying this correct, but my vote on that debate was very clear why I voted as I voted. If it would be free or GST, it would be free, but it wasn't the option then.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member, Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. I think that there really is an important principle at stake here, which is that it's the States Assembly that's the sovereign decision-making body of the island of Jersey. It's not the government. And at the point of April this year, when the Assembly voted in favour of P66 to instruct the government that our view was that GST ought to be taken off of menstrual sanitary products, it was counter-proposed, although only in words, not in an actual proposition from the then government, that as an alternative proposal, those products would be made available for free. The state said, that's very interesting, but we're going to vote for the proposition to remove GST from them instead. At that point, the proposal to provide free sanitary products was no longer an alternative proposal, but it was a supplemental proposal on top of what had already been agreed. So I think that that is probably not quite accurately reflected in the wording of the government plan, where it says on page 37 that in agreeing that proposition, the Assembly previously requested the Minister for Treasury and Resources to issue law drafting instructions to make all menstrual sanitary products exempt from GST. The 100-day plan includes an alternative proposal to provide free sanitary products. Well, it kind of didn't. It reaffirmed a proposal that already had been made by the previous government, a supplemental proposal, and simply confirmed it. That was not the mechanism to say, and the previous decision of the Assembly now counts for nothing. The way that you seek permission from this Assembly to alter or go back on entirely a previous decision we've made is to come to the Assembly and ask for permission. And it may well be the case that you'll get that permission, especially if you've got a good argument. It's not right, sir, that for something to be agreed in very clear and specific terms in a standalone proposition from the Assembly, to then more or less hide in a footnote in a much bigger document, that will no longer be the case, especially when, as the document of the government plan is presented, there's no specific vote on it. It's only through Deputy Feltham's amendment to it that there becomes a specific vote. When Deputy Feltham was making her speech on this, I noticed over there the Constable of St Helier grinning a little bit, because I think he probably has deja vu, and this point may come up in his debate on an amendment coming up, where the state has previously made these kinds of decisions, and then when the bigger document comes later, whether that's a budget or a government plan or an island plan, we suddenly find that it's not in there. So what would have been the appropriate thing to do would have been for the government to bring a standalone rescindment motion, or, and this is slightly more complex, would be to bring forward a government plan that respected that States Assembly decision, but provided it in its own paragraph or with a government-proposed amendment to enable a vote on that matter specifically in this debate, but they didn't do that. So I don't think that we should give in and allow that precedent to be set. This Assembly is the sovereign decision-making body, and where we make a decision, the government should be required to accept that decision and do its best to carry it out. If it can't carry it out because circumstances change or a problem that nobody had anticipated arises, they are free to come to the Assembly to explain themselves. And if they've got really good reasons, we'll have to accept that and give them some leeway. And that might mean either a change in timetable, or it might mean you turning on that decision entirely. But it must return to the Assembly for it to be a decision. So I voted in favour of P66. I remember it being an absolutely fascinating debate where I learnt a huge amount on things I didn't know much about before. And I cast my vote in favour of that proposition, knowing full well that a that an alternative proposal was being put together by the then government, who I also did not trust, that they would also work on this. I voted in favour of it in that full knowledge, and now nothing has changed. That scheme may well now be in place, although there's some feedback about it not being not being provided as well as it could do. But there's nothing set in stone to say that that's now a permanent fixture of government services. It's something that could be voluntarily changed. It's not provided for in statute or in an alternative standalone proposition in this Assembly that it must be provided in future, and therefore it could easily be forgotten about and could easily be rolled back, or it might come into disuse and somebody at some level of government decide, people probably won't miss that, so let's not bother carrying on in future, as we've seen before. So, Sir, I would ask members to support the amendment from Deputy Feltham. Say to the government, you must carry on with the instructions that this Assembly has given you, and in future say to that government that if they are going to have to divert from the instructions provided by this Assembly, then come here and tell us. We'll hear their explanation and we'll make up our minds on a case-by-case basis. And I'm disappointed so far that there have been instances of this. The Chief Minister did mention discussions that were had with scrutiny on this, and just to be clear, that sat in that room as President of the Scrutiny Liaison Committee, I expressed those concerns. What I certainly did not do was say, don't worry about it. I expressed those concerns and maintained those concerns, and if this happens again in future, we will keep pushing on that because it's not acceptable.
Thank you very much. Deputies, any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Scott.
Sir, I would like a little bit of clarification here because I'm a bit confused about the effect of rejecting this amendment and what the government is intending in this respect. I very much appreciate Deputy Mezek raising the point generally that if propositions have been passed by the States Assembly, they have been passed, and that really the right procedure is to revoke them. But I also learn of reference to a ruling that I understand you made, and I'm having difficulty in terms of understanding quite what the effect of that ruling is, and whether that means effectively that if this proposition were rejected by the States Assembly, but nevertheless it approved the government plan with the little I in it, in the proposition, that itself would have the effect of revoking the original proposition? Because
yes, it would.
Oh, I understand now. Okay, right. Thank you.
The ruling that I gave, I hadn't appreciated whether it had been received wide circulation or just to those who had asked the question. But I have taken the view that the terms of the government plan amount, if adopted, to a rescindment of the original motion that the Assembly passed, but that it was open to Deputy Feltham to put an amendment to that, which would require a separate debate on a later occasion were those decisions to be rescinded.
So by voting contra to Deputy Feltham's amendment, but supporting the government plan in its final
There will
form,
be a
I'm kind of cutting some red tape.
That will be the rescindment.
Thank you.
So can I just ask a follow-up point of order? I
Yes.
wasn't necessarily aware of the exact wording of that ruling. Does that mean in future then, if a member, say in this Assembly, were to win a proposition to do with some funding implication or spending implication, and then it just simply didn't appear in the next government plan, it would be considered rescinded?
It didn't appear in the next government plan. No,
So
I think it would have to be expressly not provided for. It would have to be expressly avoided, as it were. That would be my view. But I can't make a ruling on that because, frankly, I would need to look at the precise wording and detail before I could. But initially, it seems to me that this particular iteration of the government plan clearly addressed it and determined that it would not be going with it in the way that it was originally passed by the Assembly, and that appeared to me to be a rescindment. Did you wish to speak? You've already
Yes,
spoken.
just to follow up on Deputy Tadia's point then. So if the general effect is that if in the body of the government plan there's an implied...
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut across you, and perhaps I should have just shut this down. This is the chair doesn't make rulings on hypothetical matters from here. It will make a ruling if it's called upon to do so. Particular, it's made the ruling in connection with this particular matter, but I don't propose to make generalised observations about what rulings may or may not be on future occasions.
Thank you.
Very much. Deputy Dublé.
Thank you, sir. This is another one I'm really struggling with because I absolutely abhor the notion of women having to pay any kind of tax for products to deal with what is a natural biological process that only women have to deal with. And I think that was firmly established, wasn't it, in the debate on removing the GST. So what we have is a consensus by the previous Assembly that women should not have to pay GST on their period products. And then a refreshing approach from the new government that says we're going to provide free products. Now, there are different levels of free, aren't there? And I think what is being made available at the moment is certainly an improvement on what there was before, whereby there was nothing free and women were paying GST. But, and I understand that it's a pilot. For me personally, that scheme does not quite go far enough. And I think, again, also that there is an understanding of that because the Chief Minister is running a consultation and she wouldn't be doing so unless she wanted to improve upon that scheme, which is, a handful of government buildings that have free products. And they're, I think, as the Social Security Minister said, the kind of traditional, conventional products wrapped in plastic, single use, which is not something that we really want to be promoting. And I firmly believe that to improve upon the removal of GST from sanitary products, the level of free that we actually need to reach needs to be a lot wider than just those types of products in those handful of buildings. And again, I think there's probably agreement on that amongst the Council of Ministers. But again, that was still being formed. We're still waiting for the results of the survey. So I'm tempted to vote for this because I know in the past sometimes governments commit, they say they're working on things and it doesn't happen. But then I'm part of this government. I'm an assistant minister, and whilst assistant ministers don't have the same level of say as ministers, I suppose what I'd like to do now is make my position very clear. And I firmly believe that a full range of period products should be made available completely free to any islander that needs them. And I think there are a variety of mechanisms whereby that could happen. It's a biological process that could be defined as a medical process. Why are these items not available either on prescription or at pharmacies free of charge? Wherever items are being sold, they could be available free of charge. I think there's many ways that could happen. And I also firmly believe that the eco-friendly plastic-free options should be not only provided free by government, but should be promoted because, and again, it is the younger generations, those of us in our 20s and 30s and teens that are using these products. And they are life-changing. And also they save a heck of a lot of money. So that is my view on this, and I will listen to the summing up, but I think I'm minded to go with the government on this because I know that the Chief Minister, I hope she's hearing what I'm saying, and I hope she will take those views that I've expressed and make sure that they are part of the review and carried forward. But I will listen to the summing up.
Well, thank you, sir. Deputy Mezek noted how Deputy Feltham's words struck a chord with me as she outlined her proposition. And what followed from the Chief Minister, I'm afraid, sent a chill through me because she said there was a whole suite of measures that the new government wanted to rescind. And so I would just seek your advice on this because Standing Orders 23 provides that a rescindment requires at least 3 members of the states to sign it. And I'm not aware that that's happened in this case. And also that it will be accompanied by a report setting out why the proposition should be rescinded. And it seems to me that test hasn't been met in this case.
Well, it's a matter on which I've already made a ruling, Connétable. I have no reason not to allow the ruling to be circulated generally, which explains my thinking. I'm afraid I don't have it in front of me, and so it might be helpful if that was circulated generally so that my thinking on the matter can be explained. But in short, I looked to, in this case, the effect of what was taking place, took into mind the fact that the government plan, although it's put forward by the Council of Ministers, in effect must have the support of a significant number of members to bring it, and the effect of it was a rescindment. And I took the view that it was a rescindment in anything but, in all possibly but name, but it was definitely a rescindment, and that therefore it should be treated as such, because that was clearly the effect of it. Because it was a government plan.
Thank you, sir. I'm grateful. That, of course, still doesn't deal with the inadequacy of comments from the Council of Ministers, which cannot or do not, certainly in the 2 cases I'm thinking about, form an adequate report to justify rescindment. I would also ask you, sir, to circulate your advice fairly quickly, because I have an amendment coming up which appears to be suffering from the same fate as Deputy Feltham's, and if it indeed my amendment is being rescinded, amounts to if my amendment to the government plan is lost, that will effectively amount to rescindment. Then I think there should be a report to at least explain why that has to be. Thank you, sir.
I'll ask the greffier to circulate it to members. It's just been done.
So may I ask a point of order?
Yes.
So it seems to me that there are now at least 2 different ways for a rescindment to be enacted, one of which is what Connétable Crowcroft, the Constable of St Helier, has said, which is in accordance with standing orders, sir. The other is, I don't want to use the word, but it seems like more of a stealth way of doing it, whereby if it's included in a government plan with an express decision that something is not going to go ahead, that's considered a rescindment already. And that doesn't have the same level of democratic input in debate that the first method does. So I'm asking, I guess, for a ruling in the sense that, does that mean that this debate we're having is to ask if that second method that's being used is acceptable to this Assembly in terms of affecting a rescindment?
This particular amendment, if passed, will mean that there will need to be a specific and separate rescindment motion brought. I imagine in strict accordance with standing orders. And therefore a vote for this amendment will mean that the government will need, if they wish to rescind the motion that was passed by the previous government, to bring a specific rescindment motion for that purpose. That, I think, is the only reach of this particular amendment. I mean, hopefully that clarifies what matters for members. Deputy Scott?
So I'll speak on this proposition now.
I thought you already had, Deputy.
No, I asked you. I asked for some clarification, sir, if that's okay.
Yes, very well.
So I could understand what I was talking about, which I hopefully do now. That I do sympathise very much with Deputy Doublet's position in terms of GST on period products generally, and also I do sympathise with Deputy Tadier. I have actually come across a situation in planning, actually, where protected tree orders have been revoked by planning permissions just filed, and it looks like one regime has somehow been used to revoke another. But that is up to us to change and make more clear. So on the basis of what I now understand this to be, which is basically by rejecting, by by voting contra to this proposition that I am approving a revocation of the previous proposition to support free period products. That's what I'll be doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Deputy Joan.
Thank you, sir. I also have great sympathy with Deputy Dublay's points about absolutely taking off GST for period products. But I'm also very much supportive of the government in providing free period products. And I just wanted, though, to put on record that this is not a new thing. Actually, the Sir Optimus International of Jersey and also the Jersey Sustainable Period Products Project have been providing free period products to Year Sixes for a number of years. And this year, they actually launched a project specifically for Year 6 girls on the island with eco-friendly washable pads. And this is something I would absolutely support and encourage, that whatever products are supported by the government, that those kind of eco-friendly washable pads, ones that then can be reused and be sustainable, is something that will not only save money but also be good for the environment, and something that then you can use going forward. So Year 6 is a really good target to start that. So I just wanted to ensure on record that these organisations are also commended for their work in this area. Thank you.
Deputy, we've reached the point where the Assembly on the last occasion agreed to adjourn for a short break, and therefore, absent any propositions to vary that, and there are none, we are stand adjourned for 15 minutes approximately.